Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is story about what if Naruto revives Minato part 1. Before I start, please do support for more amazing content and comments for part 2. Do consider to subscribe my channel and share my video to your friends and check out the description as well. Let's start the video. If he weren't so frustrated about his latest fuinjutsu experiment blowing up in his face, Minato would have probably been more worried about the burning sensation on his skin. No matter what Kushina would say, he was not pouting. Minato did not pout. He was above that, and completely justified in his frustration when it was the 5th time he had unsuccessfully tried to reach a breakthrough for his most recent project. If he'd known being Hokage left him with so little time to himself, he would have still taken the position. Konoha needed the guidance. Sarutobi was tired. He couldn't lead the village through another war. Minato took a look at the sun's position and huffed, deciding he would have to give up for the evening. He reached for his location seals to transport himself into the village, pausing to choose his destination. He contemplated if it was worth another of Kushina's pranks to teleport straight into their bedroom, but decided against it. He was still picking glitter out of his hair from last time and didn't want to imagine what boredom made her come up with this time. Strictly speaking, he wasn't supposed to teleport over the village borders at all, unless for emergencies. Hokage-sama, please, Reito had said after one time too many, exasperated and struggling with the new formality of addressing him as Kage. You can't sneak out of the village like this. At least take somebody with you. He'd felt like a child being scolded rather than the new Hokage, and Kushina had laughed hard enough to risk pulling a muscle. Decision made, Minato picked a seal relatively close to their home. He stumbled upon impact and caught himself on the nearest brick wall. Minato hissed, snatching away his hand and steadying himself with a step backwards. That shouldn't have happened. His landings hadn't been this wobbly since he perfected his technique years ago. He raised his throbbing hand to take a closer look. He should have probably done that the second his experiment had backfired. The palm of his hand was tender and sore, the newly developed seal, defective, since he definitely hadn't planned for it to end up decorating his skin, scorched into it with black ink. Behind the burning he could feel an odd tugging sensation. Maybe the seal had thrown off his teleportation technique? It shouldn't have been able to interfere, but experiments with fuinjutsu were often unpredictable. Kushina would help him figure it out. She'd appreciate the distraction, considering how often she moaned about not being able to do anything while pregnant. He chose a longer path to their home, one that was more likely to be deserted at this time. He wasn't in the mood to deal with anyone other than Kushina for the rest of the day. She'd probably complain about how long he'd been gone, leaving her alone and bored at home. With Mikoto away on a mission, her best friend was unavailable to keep her company. He was passing more people than he had expected in this part of the village. Minato blinked, slowing down as he spotted a building he had never seen before. And had that market district been there before? He kept walking as if he hadn't noticed anything off. A silent disruption of his chakra flow told him that he wasn't dealing with a simple genjutsu. Another apartment building that definitely hadn't been there a few hours ago. The illusion had to be strong for him to be unable to dispel it. He tensed with every person he came across. Nobody seemed to pay him much attention. There was a reason he'd left his gear at home. Curious eyes slipped off of civilian clothes like they made their wearer invisible. It was starting to get late, and shopkeepers were packing up their wares, preparing to retire for the day. A young boy was being scolded by an old lady. He must have been a troublemaker. The stand next to them was a mess, half-squashed fruit and vegetables lying everywhere. He kept walking, kept his head low and his chakra at the tip of his fingers. He realized he could only feel about half of the seals he'd placed around the village. Minato noticed his pursuers immediately. He couldn't risk a fight. There were too many civilians around. Besides, he recognized one of the chakra signatures. Minato leaped onto a fairly high building to face them head-on. "Genma," he said, hoping everything would clear up soon. "What's going on?" "Funny," came his answer, in a voice far deeper than he had expected. "I was about to ask the same." Minato tensed, facing Genma and two ANBU shinobi. Genma, who was his friend and his guard, who was careless and calm, always a smirk and a joke on his lips. Genma, who was not the teenager he remembered. He was looking at a man, broad shoulders and sharp features and looking older than Minato himself. Still, he recognized the face, recognized the senban, and most importantly, he recognized his chakra. Genma's voice was nearly void of emotion. Ice lined his words, made them ragged and cold. "Genma, I don't." Minato tried to take a step forward, but froze as all shinobi took fighting stances. His face hardened and his tone grew sharper. "Shinobi, explain." Now, all three shinobi straightened up at the command, instinct telling them to obey. Genma caught himself before he could oblige. Why he refused to acknowledge Minato as his superior, he didn't know. Another question to add to his steadily growing pile. "How dare you?" Genma whispered. "How dare you wear his face? Steal his voice?" The implications of that statement were so massive, it took Minato a moment to process. "You think I'm an impersonator?" Genma laughed at the surprise in his voice, strangled and humorless. "Do you really need it laid out for you? If you would." Genma fought with himself, his mouth restless as if he chewed on something bitter. He spit out the words like poison. "Minato is dead." Minato didn't know what to say. The seal burned in his palm, and Genma's eyes bored into him like ice shards. He tried, and failed, again to dispel a genjutsu. There wasn't one. This was no illusion, and Genma believed what he was saying. So what did that leave him with? Bring me to your leader, he said, and wondered who would be waiting in the room that had been his only hours prior. Sarutobi was the Hokage and Minato was dead. That's what the discussion in the Hokage's office boiled down to. They asked him questions only very few people knew the answers to. They argued. They brought in a censor, who couldn't disprove his identity. They argued. They made him show them one of his signature moves, the Rasengan, under strict supervision and threats to his life should he step out of line. They argued. In the end they summoned a Yamanaka and let him repeat his claims, proving he wasn't lying. And yet again they argued. Minato took it all with a stoic facade and minimal input himself, mentally reeling from the picture that unraveled in front of his own eyes. Sarutobi looked old. Everybody he knew looked older. Genma was no longer a gangly teenager. Shikaka had 2 new scars slicing his face, but Sarutobi had been old when Minato had last seen him. Now? The former Hokage looked ancient, lines and wrinkles covering his face from age and years of worry. Over 10 years, was what they told him. He had been dead for over 10 years. He'd missed a decade of Konoha's history. Had skipped it? Minato didn't know what to think. Sarutobi was as silent as Minato, letting the other shinobi bicker and argue over what they should do with him. It's not him. How are we even considering this? All of our tests confirmed it. All of them. What else do you suggest we do? I'd be happy with an explanation, for the start. Isn't it convenient that he doesn't have one? How did he get into the village in the first place? None of the guards spotted him until he was right in the middle of it. Oh please, so he's a skilled infiltrator instead of a regular one. It's not that big a leap. Why don't we just ask him? Shikaka chimed in, and the room fell silent. Minato couldn't help but feel uncomfortable under the piercing sets of eyes directed on him. I used one of my Thunder God seals to teleport. That set them off again. Minato suppressed the urge to sigh. Thunder God seals. Are you hearing this? I don't know why we're even listening to. This is ridiculous. Bring back the Yamanaka for a proper interrogation. That's what we should have done from the... Enough. Sarutobi didn't raise his voice, and yet every person in the room fell silent. His eyes were focused solely on Minato. You've been quiet. Minato met his gaze head-on. He needed a moment to sort out his priorities. One question won out over Kushina. Barely. The war. How is our situation? Sarutobi looked at him with a half-hidden smile. The war is over. It ended over 10 years ago. Konoha is at peace. Minato waited. Sarutobi leaned back in his seat. That's all the details I am able to give you, as long as there is any doubt left that you're not who you claim to be. Minato's mouth tightened. At peace could mean anything from united with the other villages in friendship and rainbows to hanging by a thread from the next declaration of war. Another question was burning on his tongue, so he let the matter go. For now, where is Kushina? Now that he knew to look for it, the absence of her unique beacon of chakra was disturbingly clear. The shinobi around him were sharing glances, and Sarutobi's eyes slipped to his office table. Nobody answered. Something in Minato's chest tightened. If he was dead in this older, bizarre version of Konoha, did that mean? Could it mean? No. Where is she? He repeated, and his voice was bound tightly enough to burst. Shikaka stepped forward, looking past Minato and towards Sarutobi. It's public information. He could ask anyone. The old Hokage sighed, but gave his approval with a nod. Shikaka met his gaze. I'm sorry. They told him about the attack. They told him about the Kyuubi's rampage, about it taking Kushina and part of Konoha with it. About her sacrifice that saved the village. They left out the details, Minato could tell. But he couldn't bring himself to care, because why would he when he'd fallen into this bizarre version of Konoha and would never see Kushina again? But Kushina hadn't been the only family he had. What about our son? Minato's hands were clenched to fists, his desperate attempt to hold on to something. Anything, because depending on the answer he would receive, Kushina was pregnant. The baby, what? Where is our son? Nobody looked him in the eyes, and Minato could feel his chest caving in. This couldn't be real. It couldn't. He gasped for breath, felt lightheaded and dizzy. Nothing felt real. This was all some dumb, horrible illusion. He wanted to ask about his team, but he didn't want to hear the answer. Everything in this version of Konoha was wrong, and he didn't want to hear more. It was too much. Shikaka realized what was about to happen a second too late. Minato, don't. Minato used one of his remaining seals and vanished. His and Kushina's home was gone. Not gone per se, but different. Changed. Other people lived there, as they had for years. Their belongings would have been gotten rid of long ago. All their memories were lost. Minato was slumped against the cushions on the couch, staring straight ahead. He would have to go back at one point. Even if he didn't, they would find him. It was just he needed a moment for himself. They told him that Kushina had died after the Kyuubi had broken out. Was that the entire truth? Minato knew about the risks of a Jinchuriki giving birth. He and Kushina had discussed the issue at length. They'd developed contingency plans, just in case of something going wrong. Did this prove that they hadn't done enough? Something must have caused the QB to break out. People had died in the attack, people other than Kushina. If Minato hadn't done enough to stop it, their blood was on his hands. By the time he felt a presence enter the apartment, he only felt numb. They told you about me? Minato asked. A pause. They had a feeling you'd come here. He tried preparing for it this time, and still Minato was taken aback at the voice that sounded far too deep. He turned. You're taller than me, he burst out, staring at Kakashi in both mortification and shock. Kakashi blinked, his one visible eye widened. Then, only increasing the bizarreness of the situation, he laughed. Kakashi laughed, as if the sheer disbelief in Minato's voice wouldn't have sent his younger self into a rage. I guess I had to get a growth spurt eventually. There were other changes. Kakashi wore his headband so that it covered one of his eyes. He held himself differently, too. Gone was the strict rigidness of his younger self, gone the tension in his shoulders, the frown making him look constantly annoyed. Kakashi looked more relaxed than his younger self had ever been. The Jonin vest suited him. He noticed Kakashi was staring, too. What is it? Nothing, I just... Kakashi looked away. I never realized how young you were. When you took me as your student, Minato sat back, stunned. This was just a headache waiting to happen, but Kakashi was older than him now. His student was older than him, and looking at him like he expected him to vanish into thin air. Kakashi? Sorry. Kakashi looked away. It's been a long time since I've seen you. Minato didn't know what to say. Something about that sentence felt so fragile. What had happened to Kakashi while he'd been gone? Do tell, Kakashi said, his voice sounding stilted. What would you have done if I'd moved and you'd broken into some stranger's apartment instead? Minato didn't manage to muster a smile. Kakashi, was there something he wanted to ask? What did he actually want to hear the answer for? Kushina and I, did anything of ours survive? Kakashi paused, piercing him with a glance. Minato had a hard time reading him. It really is you, isn't it? How is that even possible? Minato shrugged helplessly, raising his hand. Fuinjutsu experiment gone wrong? I hadn't really had the time to find out. Or the motivation. It was hard to make himself care about how it had happened. Kakashi's gaze lingered on his burnt palm. He stood. Wait here. He came back carrying a single, measly box. I'm sorry. Most of it got destroyed in the attack. Minato opened the box with a lump in his throat. This was all that was left of Kushina and his life. His hot pink apron. Why are you laughing? And nothing. It's nothing. Where did you even get that? A few prototypes of his custom-made kunai. So, how many new trees do we have to plant this time? That's not funny. Just wait until I manage to perfect the technique. I'm really close. Less than last time. I'm getting better, I swear. Even one of Kushina's maternity dresses had survived. Ugh. Being pregnant sucks. Next time you can carry the baby. I've had enough of this. As much as I'd love to do that, I'm afraid that's not how it works, sweetheart. Minato chuckled softly, his eyes suspiciously damp. He waved off Kakashi's hesitant sensei? And continued to look through their things. It really wasn't much. Oddly enough, he felt calmer. Not good in any interpretation of the word, but not as restless. And there were still questions left. Kakashi. Where are Obito and Rin? He held onto one of his old kunai because he had to hold onto something. Kakashi took him to the memorial. There was a clench in Minato's gut, but not much more. He had expected it, since everything in this world seemed to be designed to cause him pain. If his other two students were there, they would have come with Kakashi to see him. Inbi were following them, observing from the shadows. Minato stared at the memorial stone as he listened to Kakashi's story. Killed, both of them, killed on missions during the war. Minato could feel the guilt and self-loathing radiating off of Kakashi. He blamed himself. He shouldn't, it had to be Minato's fault. He hadn't done enough, he hadn't been there. They'd only been children at the time. Why hadn't he been there? Kakashi raising his forehead protector was the last straw. Obito's eye stared back at him, the Sharingan blood red and a scar slicing through the eyelids above and below it. Obito's eye and Kakashi's guilt, raw and as fresh as if it had happened only days ago. It was too much. Pain burst in his chest like he'd been hit, his throat closing up and aching. His family was dead. Most of his team was too. Kakashi was grieving, hurting beyond imagination, and Minato hadn't been there to help him, hadn't been there to stop it. His eyes prickled and he could feel his hands trembling. Why hadn't he been there to stop it? The pain in his chest burned and there was a tugging sensation in his palm. Sensei? What's wrong? Everything hurt and his hand was burning. There was a yank and Minato fell into nothingness. His knees hit the ground and Minato caught himself just before falling over. He felt faint, his senses dull and sluggish. At least the burning in his hand had stopped. Minato squinted, trying to clear his head. Hokage-sama? The ground was swaying under his knees, and he didn't trust himself to stand. He could make out the memorial stone before him, so he hadn't actually moved in place. But where was Kakashi? Over here. Hokage-sama, are you alright? He could feel Shinobi landing beside him. Why, yeah, he staggered to his feet, steadied by a strong grip around his arm. The fog in his head was clearing, but he still couldn't feel Kakashi. Something was odd. Where is he? That effectively cleared his mind. He would recognize that shouting everywhere. The shinobi around him took a step, or several, back, and the grip around his arm loosened as if whoever was supporting him contemplated the risk of letting him fall in order to get distance between them and the nearing tidal wave. Fiery red hair filled his vision, wild and framing a furious pair of eyes. Minato's breath got stuck in his throat. Kushina, where were you? Nobody's seen you for 2 days. 2 days? It had been hours at most. Kushina, everyone's been looking for you, Namikaze. Do you know how worried I was? I know, Kushina. Sneak out of the village all the time. The Hokage, alone, outside of the village. During war times. Are you mental? Minato threw his arms around her, and Kushina fell silent. He breathed in her scent, fuinjutsu paper and ink and the paint they had picked for Naruto's bedroom. She smelled like home. Her hair was tied in a messy ponytail, oddly unkempt, and Minato. Kushina put her arms around him hesitantly. Minato tightened the embrace, holding her close. Kushina was here. She was safe. He never wanted to let go. Kushina put her hands on his shoulders, and Minato let her push him away reluctantly. Stop being emotional and start talking. You owe me, she broke off mid-sentence, staring at him. She must have noticed his tears. He laughed shakily, not caring that his wife and the ANBU were watching. It's good to see you, Kushina. You weren't gone that long, she grumbled, frowning in both irritation and worry. What happened? One of the ANBU was brave, or reckless, enough to interrupt. Hokage-sama, Uzumaki-san. Maybe we should escort you to the hospital. You shut it. He's fine. If he can hug, he can talk. And he will start doing so immediately, she said, piercing Minato with a glare. Won't you, husband? Minato grinned and waved off his shinobi. It was great to be back. In the end he managed to persuade Kushina to have a little more patience. There was a mass panic in the making and several hysterical council members he had to take care of. He had to reassure the council that yes, he was back, that no, he was not hurt and no hostile activity had taken place against him. His guard detail had worked themselves into a frenzy during his absence, and he could be lucky that his disappearance hadn't reached the public yet. While no one was happy to wait longer for an explanation, Minato insisted on talking privately with his wife first. Once they finally arrived home, Minato didn't hesitate to tell Kushina everything, starting with the biggest bombshell. I went to the future. Kushina blinked. The future. I know it sounds crazy, that's an understatement, but I was experimenting with my seals. The Thunder God ones? A variation of them, yeah, but, oh, Kushina said, and her eyes widened like she had come to a sudden realization. I understand. You do? Of course. She put a hand on his shoulder, a sympathetic look in her eyes. Look, if you screwed up and teleported out of range of your seals without a way back, that's okay. What? It happens to the best of us. There's no shame in admitting it. But no! Kushina, please. Silence. You're serious about this. Kushina paused, holding his glance. How do you know you weren't put under a genjutsu? It was too elaborate. Disrupting my chakra flow did nothing. And there's this. He held open his palm, showing Kushina the seal. Her eyes widened as she caught sight of it. She leaped over the back of the couch, snatching up a piece of paper from one of the many piles strewn across the house and copied the seal in quick, adept strokes. Finished with that she studied it, murmuring under her breath. Minato knew better than to interrupt. After a few minutes she whistled without taking her eyes off the seal. Wow. You really screwed up. What was it supposed to do? Nothing. It wasn't finished. I was just experimenting with a few new components. Minato shrugged helplessly. It activated on its own. Kushina hummed, but didn't answer beyond that. Eventually she sighed, putting down the seal. That's gonna take a while to untangle. And you're supposed to be a prodigy. Anything else I should know? I think it reacted to my Thunder God technique somehow. But other than that, I'll figure it out. Cleaning up after your mess, you're welcome. Minato beamed. He knew she would. He had the bestest wife ever. But in the meantime, Kushina said, grinning cheerfully, what does the future look like? Did you throw in the towel yet and let me take over? Her grin faded at Minato's expression. She took on a more solemn tone. You cried. When you came back and saw me you cried. Minato couldn't suppress the urge and pulled Kushina in for another hug. She complied, wrapping her arms around him without hesitation. He closed his eyes, glad to be close to her. You weren't there. You died. How? The QB broke out. They told me you gave your life to protect the village and stop it. Kushina let go of him, laying one hand on her belly. Over their unborn son. Minato put his hand over hers, answering the unspoken question in her widened eyes. He was glad she hadn't spoken it out loud. What else? Obito and Rin. Both of them. Kakashi was there, but the corner of his mouth tugged downwards at the memory. He was different. Grieving and blaming himself. Minato. Kushina laid her arm around him, resting her head on his shoulder. She could tell that he needed it, and Minato soaked in the comfort of her warmth. With Kushina this close, his memories of the future felt like nothing but a bad dream. Well, she said, opting Minato sufficiently comforted. What are we gonna do about it? She grinned, flexing her wrists and murder in her eyes. Bestest wife ever. In retrospect, Minato wished he'd stayed longer and asked more questions. At the time, details had been the last thing he'd wanted. I'll start working on improvements for everything QB related, Kushina said, already looking over old notes and sketches that were strewn around her on the couch. It sucks that you didn't pay closer attention. It would be easier if we knew what caused it to break out. Actually, about that, Minato trailed off, frowning down at his palm. I might have a solution. Oh yeah? Spill. He looked up, raising his hand and showing off the seal. I can still feel the seal pulling. Kushina's head snapped up from her notes, her eyes widening. You mean? The connection is still there. He paused, hesitating in a strange mix of apprehension and anticipation. I might be able to go back. There were many things Minato had to take care of. Missions had been completed and assigned while he was gone. 2 meetings had been held without him. There were major updates about the other villages' movements. Minato had to get up to date and familiarize himself with everything he had missed during the last 2 days. War was a busy time for hidden villages and Minato was at the very center of it. He could be lucky that Sarutobi had taken over some of his duties and helped to hold things together while he'd been gone. The title had passed to Minato only recently, and Sarutobi had agreed to postpone his retirement in order to make the transition easier for him. Then there was the matter of explaining where he'd been. Kushina and he had agreed that time travel, at least at the moment, was too much for most of the council members to handle. They'd settled on a vague but believable excuse that wasn't so much a lie as it was leaving out the core information. A training accident, Fugaku said, repeating his words stoically. There were chuckles and sighs of exasperation all around the table, and even a muffled again. Inoichi was openly laughing. Could have been worse. Nothing was even on fire. Have you been experimenting with your teleportation seals? Choza sounded genuinely curious. Minato gave a sheepish grin, mildly regretting his insistence on a casual setting. A variation of them, yeah? Fuinjutsu can be unpredictable. Minato improvised the questions he was asked with ease. Soon all of his friends seemed satisfied and they moved on to the less essential developments that had taken place during his absence. The gossip. Minato would decide later if and how many people he would let in on his little secret. So far he had no clue what he was supposed to be doing with his scarce knowledge of the future. Well, there was one thing. You're going to what? Obito was not impressed, to put it mildly. I said I'm putting you 3 on standby for a while. Minato's voice was apologetic, but relentless. He knew it was selfish. They were in the middle of a war. But if there was nothing else he could do, there was at least this. It's not permanent. I have to take care of a few things, and I want to keep you 3 in the village until then. But sensei. Obito yelled, half protest and half whine. Kakashi was calmer but no less irritated. What did we do? It's not punishment, Kakashi. Then what? Why forbid us to go on missions? Why now? Yeah. Obito agreed. In any other situation Minato would be amazed that the 2 boys were on the same page for once. Why are you babying us? We can handle missions, we're not genin anymore, sensei. Rin was calmer than both of her teammates, but that didn't mean she was happy. Is it really a good idea to keep us off the roster? With Konoha's current position? Minato felt a spark of pride. His students were smart, and they were right. But when he looked at Kakashi he saw Obito's eyes staring back at him drowned in Kakashi's grief. He saw Kakashi and Rin's names glaring back at him from cold stone. I have to ask you to trust me on this. There are enough duties to complete within the village, and you can use the time for training. Seeing Kakashi's defiant glance and Obito's pout, he added, stricter, that's an order. Is that understood? Yes, sensei, Kakashi said, closely followed by Rin. Obito crossed his arms but followed suit. Minato could breathe a little easier knowing he had taken a step towards a better future. He and Kushina continued to work on improving their seal work, Kushina more so than Minato. Not only were his duties as Kage and teacher taking up his time, between the 2 of them Kushina was easily the more skilled seal master. The designs she came up with were both breathtaking and insane. Her ideas were the sort that nobody else could dream of. Every time he came home to Kushina sprawled in an odd position with her tongue between her teeth, paper and brushes strewn around her, and ink smudges on her face and their furniture, he was reminded of all the reasons he loved her so much. It was on one of those evenings a few days after the incident, both of them sat on the floor surrounded by fuinjutsu seals, that he felt it again. The tugging in his hand, weak but getting more insistent as the seconds passed. Kushina. I think it's happening. Kushina abandoned her project, leaped up and grabbed the bag they had prepared from the couch. She dropped it into his lap and took his hand to look at the seal. It's not glowing or giving off heat. No signs of it activating. Are you sure? I can feel it. Kushina accepted his judgment with a nod. Come on then. They were out of the window and sitting on the roof, only seconds later. Minato wanted to avoid arriving in some stranger's living room. How long do you have? Minato hesitated, contemplating. I don't know. It feels slower than last time. Still, not long. Quick then. What's the plan? Go back. Find out more about what went wrong. The QB first, then the kids. Find out about other major events, anything that could tell us what to expect. Kushina nodded along with him. Don't forget to be thorough. Don't get distracted, and don't let anybody stop you. If they try, kick their butts. Minato laughed. I don't think that would make them trust me more. He checked the bag to make sure they hadn't forgotten anything. Fuinjutsu equipment. A notebook, standard shinobi gear and his custom-made kunai. The seal started to feel warm. He spoke faster. What about you? I'll tell everyone that you caught something while you were gone and you're too sick to work. I'll take over your most important duties. I memorized the plan for the next week, don't worry, and deflect questions until you're back. Take care of anyone who gets too nosy. Minato resolutely ignored that last one. Remember, it doesn't matter if people get suspicious. You only have to keep it up for a few days. Piece of cake. The only thing you should worry about is me stealing your title while you're gone. She grinned, her eyes glistening mischievously. Just wait, they won't want to let me go once they see me in action. What about me then? You can be my trophy husband. And a stay-at-home dad. Minato laughed, pulling Kushina closer. The seal burned hotter. No complaints from me. He kissed her, tender and lovingly in the moments they had left. It would be easier, this time around. Knowing she was waiting for him, taking care of the village in his stead, he pulled away, keeping one hand to gently cup her cheek. See you soon. Don't screw it up, Namikaze. She looked away and Minato knew her well enough to see the concern in her expression. The seal was ablaze and Minato had enough time to clutch his bag closer and smile at Kushina before it yanked at him and dragged him away. When Minato opened his eyes, he was alone. He felt calmer this time, knowing what had happened and what he had to expect. He didn't try to hide, trusting that someone would notice him sooner or later. Hopefully this time it wouldn't end as badly, now that he had proven his identity once. Minato decided to take a closer look at the village and leaped over Konoha's rooftops. He saw buildings that had either been renovated or expanded since he was gone. There was an entire street of relatively new buildings, perhaps rebuilt after the Kyuubi attack. And further back, close to the borders, that was odd. Minato frowned, heading over to take a closer look. It was an entire district of the village that looked empty. Minato shuddered, an unsettling feeling in his gut. There were no people, no movement, nothing but abandoned buildings and a faint sense that something was wrong. He jumped down, feeling someone landing behind him. Genma. Perhaps he wanted to continue their confrontation from before, hopefully on better terms. Minato's question died on his tongue when he saw Genma's wide-eyed stare. He blinked in surprise. What's wrong? You're back. Oh. Of course. Minato had appeared and disappeared without a trace. They likely hadn't expected to see him again. The seal goes both ways. I don't think it will stop anytime soon. Minato, Genma said, his voice slow and clear like Minato was missing the meaning of his words. It's been weeks since you've been here. His eyes widened. It's only been a few days for me. This was worrying. He had no control over the seal when it dragged him through time. What if it missed its mark completely? What if it brought him years further into the future? A future without anyone that he knew. I'm sorry, Genma said, avoiding his glance. It's just I didn't expect to see you again. There was a moment of silence, and Minato decided to change the topic before it became too uncomfortable. What happened here? He asked, his eyes wandering around the lifeless streets. Genma hesitated. Alarm bells went off in Minato's head. Is that really how you want to start the conversation? He was stalling. Genma, please. He glanced towards the closed gates, proudly displaying the Uchiha crest. The Uchiha lived here. Why is it empty? Genma sighed, a tired, defeated sound. Damn sorry, Minato. They were killed. Slaughtered. Minato stared. Killed? All of them? All but one, yes. Two, I suppose. Minato's mind was reeling. But they had the Sharingan. The entire police force were Uchiha. I don't. Who could have been strong enough? And why? Genma's eyes wandered through the streets, slowly as if it had been a while since he'd been here. How long ago had it been for Genma? It was one of their own. Somehow managed to kill his entire clan without anybody getting the better of him. Itachi Uchiha, left only his. Itachi? Minato burst out. Fugaku and Mikoto's kid? Him, yeah? Genma looked mildly surprised at Minato's recognition. Only left his little brother alive. Everybody else he trailed off, letting the eerie silence around them speak for itself. Why did he do it? A shrug. No one really knows. Some say the strain of being an Anbu at that age was too much for him. The Uchiha madness finally caught up to their clan, people say. Minato's mouth stiffened. He'd known Itachi since he was born. He'd been his babysitter with Kushina more than once. The picture Genma was painting was impossible to connect to the 5-year-old Minato knew, the quiet, polite boy who was too smart for his own good. How long has it been? When it happened, how long had I been gone? Genma moved the samban in his mouth, thoughtful. Not long. It's been about 5 years. Minato did the math and frowned. Itachi couldn't have been older than 12, maybe 13 years old. You know, Genma started, his voice oddly stiff. He was holding eye contact now. It wasn't easy after you died. The war ended, but you were gone. And the third, he tried his best. Still does. Gunma paused. But he wasn't you. And there was a reason he retired back then. Why didn't he pass on the hat? Gunma laughed, short and without humor. Who could have taken it? Minato hesitated. He hated the bitter lining of Gunma's words, hated that he was responsible for it. I'm sorry. He was taken aback at Gunma's laugh, genuine and bright. Only you would apologize for dying. Gunma smiled and it lightened the mood a bit. You know, even though I was never officially your student, I still never had a better teacher than you. That stole a smile out of him. Minato loved teaching and could have probably been happy as a Jonin instructor, had he not set his eyes on the Hokage's position instead. But that reminded him. Sorry for changing the subject, but speaking of teaching. Do you know where my student is? He hadn't exactly left Kakashi on good terms last time. Your student? Which one? Hope flooded his chest, sweet and dizzying. So far all he had done was forbid his team from attending missions. There was no guarantee for how long his orders would be followed. They were teenagers and itching to prove themselves. Did this mean it had been enough? Had he prevented Rin and Obito from dying? Where are they? He didn't try to hide his excitement. Genma gave him an odd look. Rin just returned from a mission. You can try your luck, but she probably won't talk to you. His voice was matter-of-fact with a bitter note to it. Kakashi is at his usual place. Minato's heart sank. Genma was right. He found Kakashi at the memorial. The same air of exhaustion and grief surrounded him, the only difference being that he wore his forehead protector properly. Obito's eye was gone. Kakashi, ah. So you're back. Kakashi didn't turn to look at him. I wasn't sure if you would be. I thought I'd missed my chance for a reunion for good. Minato hesitated. Genma told me that Rin is back. She is? Kakashi's voice wasn't even mildly interested. She must have finished her mission early then. Minato didn't answer. That wasn't what he meant with back, but it told him what he needed to know. Kakashi wasn't aware of the change. He didn't know that Rin's name was supposed to be written on the stone with Obito's. Do you remember our conversation from last time? Minato asked slowly. Kakashi had told him the story of how Obito and Rin had died. He'd shown him his Sharingan. If Minato had changed it, he shouldn't be able to remember any of it. Of course. Really? What did we talk about? We talked about Kakashi trailed off, blinking in confusion. We talked about Kushina, and in Obito he furrowed his brows as if in deep concentration. His hand twitched upwards to his uncovered eye. Interesting. Do you know where Rin is? Kakashi hesitated, and the dazed look in his eyes faded. Probably. Bring me to her. Kakashi's eyes flickered back to the memorial stone. Back to Obito. Minato wanted to tear Kakashi's eyes away from it. It was killing him, seeing Kakashi in pain without being able to do anything, if you insist. Finally, Kakashi turned. She doesn't tend to be great company. They set out into the streets, Kakashi leading the way. Minato tried not to stick out, but he was still attracting attention. There wasn't much to be done about his bright hair, not unless he wanted to use a transformation technique. Heads turned towards them as they walked by, most of them frowning as if they tried to place where they knew him from. Nobody approached, but Minato hadn't expected them to. They were more likely to assume they were seeing things than connect him to their dead fourth Hokage. We're trying to steal, don't act so innocently. Mild curiosity made him look for the raised voices. I didn't take anything. Get out of here. If I see you again you'll be in real trouble. A young boy stormed out of a shop, scowling. It was the troublemaker from the old lady's stall, back during Minato's first jump. Minato's eyes lingered at the unusual color of his hair, the same shade of bright blonde as his. The whiskers had to be the markings of a minor clan, although he didn't recognize them. What are you looking at? The boy yelled and stormed off before Minato could muster an answer. Kakashi had already set off again. Maybe a little too fast. But before Minato could ask, Kakashi stopped in front of a bar. She's probably in here. She always is, after missions. Minato waited for Kakashi to enter, but he didn't move. What's wrong? Kakashi avoided his gaze. You go ahead. I'd rather sit this one out. And in a puff of smoke, Kakashi vanished. Minato frowned, but didn't try to follow. He found Rin in a far back corner, tucked away and isolated. A scar marred the skin on her cheek close to her eye and she reeked of alcohol and blood. Rin's eyes flickered up as Minato took the seat opposite of hers. She took a swing of her bottle and grimaced. So they were right. It's you. Minato didn't answer. Rin scowled. Don't look at me like that. Sad eyes won't get you anywhere. Where's Obito? He's dead. The lack of emotion in that sentence was concerning. You know he is. I was briefed. I know that Kakashi told you. He didn't tell me how it happened. At least not how it happened this time around. A knot formed in Minato's gut. What on earth could have turned Rin, sweet, wonderful Rin, into this? She stared at the table, acting like it was only her and the bottles of alcohol around her. The air around them was stale and heavy with tension. If you must know, she started, still avoiding his gaze, there was a mission. Later into the war. You were gone. Konoha needed shinobi and we were available. Minato tried to swallow the lump in his throat. He could see where this was going. It wasn't anything special. The mission went haywire and Obito didn't make it. That's all. You make it sound like it wasn't a big deal. People die, Rin said bluntly. Obito wasn't special. We were at war and people died. He was just one of many. You say that, Minato said, pressing against his better judgment, and yet you're here. Still grieving. Rin didn't answer, so he switched tactics. You're an ANBU. Aren't you? How could you tell? Lucky guess. ANBU was a magnet for broken people, so it felt. What happened to becoming a medic? Didn't work out, Rin. He waited until she looked him into the eyes. Is that because you couldn't save Obito? Pain flashed through glassy eyes and Minato had his answer. It wasn't your fault. How would you know? Rin whispered. Because I know you. And I know you would have done everything you could. She chuckled humorlessly. Well, it wasn't enough. You were gone and so was Obito, and Kakashi just changed. Who else was there? Minato swallowed an apology, knowing it would not be well received. He couldn't take his eyes off Rin, took in the pain carved in her face like the scar that should not be there. I changed it, he heard himself say. Tried. I tried to change it. Rin, when I came back here before, you were dead too. There was a pause. Maybe you should have left it that way. Rin might as well have slapped him. But the sentence sounded like a dismissal and Minato took it as such. He felt better than he had the first time around. Rin's story was a blow, but he now knew it was temporary. Seeing both of his students like this, both of them suffering because he hadn't been there to stop it, Minato would make sure to correct his mistakes. He stepped out of the bar and was hit with something that sent water gushing down his hair and shoulders. He didn't move, standing dumbfounded and dripping on the street. A water balloon. It hadn't registered as a threat, so he hadn't dodged. But who? Ha! I got you! The boy from before sat on one of the lower rooftops, cackling gleefully. Something about his laughter sent warmth through Minato's chest. He leaped onto the roof. The boy took a step back and raised his hands in surrender. Whoa! Calm down, it was just a joke. Minato couldn't take his eyes off the boy's hair. The same shade as his. What's your name, eh? Don't you know? The boy frowned at him. Aren't you from here? I'm afraid I've been away from the village for a while, Minato said, smiling. Okay, the boy said, still eyeing him suspiciously. Well, I'm Naruto Uzumaki. Don't you forget it. Minato's mind went blank. He stared at the boy, at the self-proclaimed Naruto. Who had his hair? Who had pranked him, laughing Kushina's laughter? What's wrong with you? Naruto asked bluntly. You're staring, but it couldn't be. How old are you? What kind of question is that? Please! He burst out. He needed to get an answer. Naruto. Just answer. Naruto frowned at him, but obeyed. I'm 12. And you're weird. It fit. His age fit. Minato stood gaping, taking in Naruto's appearance. Taking in his son? He was alive. Naruto was alive. Why hadn't anyone told him? Sarutobi or Gunma or Shikaku, why had none of them told him? Why hadn't Kakashi? It's nice to meet you, Naruto. He choked out the words with effort, forcing a smile on his face. He resisted the urge to sweep up Naruto and bring him along, noticing the ANBU crowding in on them. He would only scare his son. I promise I'll be back. Eh? You haven't even told me your name. Everything in him was screaming at him to go back, but he ignored it, and headed towards the Hokage's residence. He could feel the ANBU around him, holding their distance. Minato didn't care. The Hokage owed him answers. The Hokage's office was deadly silent. The same shinobi who discussed Minato's fate over his head before couldn't even look him in the eyes now. He didn't care why each of them had suddenly gotten tongue-tied. Minato was furious. Minato, Sarutobi said, the first to break the silence. You have to understand. Minato's glare sharpened. One of the younger shinobi let out a whimper, but Sarutobi wasn't as easily impressed. We couldn't have been sure that it was really you. It was sensitive information. The first time, maybe. Minato struggled to stay rational. But while I was gone you decided that the tests and Kakashi's testimony were proof enough. If you hadn't, Gunma would have brought me here the moment he found me at the Uchiha district. So why didn't he tell me? Or Rin? Or Kakashi? Maybe it was better that none of them were in the office with them. Minato wouldn't have known how to react, otherwise. Minato, please. Sarutobi couldn't look him in the eyes. Minato realized he would only get more excuses. Fine. There were more important things. Who's taking care of him? Sarutobi blinked, cut off mid-sentence. What? He's too young to live alone. Who's taking care of him? Nobody answered. Minato felt his facade crumbling. He lives by himself, Shikaku finally said. Minato bit his lip to keep himself from screaming. Does he have a guardian? Someone who checks in on him regularly? Who spends time with him? Sarutobi opened his mouth to say something but decided against it. Silence greeted him instead. Minato looked around, his eyes lingering on the people who were supposed to be his friends. How could any of them have let his son grow up alone? Tell me about him. Sarutobi leaned back in his seat, heaving a sigh. We never found out all the details. On the night that Kushina gave birth something happened and the Kyuubi broke free. He looked into the distance, lost in memories. Minato didn't comment, waiting for him to keep going. Kushina gave her life fighting it. By the time we found them, Kushina was dead and the Kyuubi was sealed inside Naruto. So Naruto was the Jinchuriki? Minato didn't want to think about what that meant for his position in the village. At the time we thought, Sarutobi cut himself off. I thought that it would be best to keep Naruto's identity secret, to let him grow up without the knowledge of what lingers inside of him. I'm afraid I was wrong. But I did not realize until it was too late. Minato swallowed against the dryness in his throat. So Naruto doesn't know he's a Jinchuriki. But everybody else does? The villagers do? Sarutobi's expression grew pained. The adults do. They were forbidden from telling their children, in the hopes that their prejudice would not be passed on. He closed his eyes. Another mistake of mine. Naruto was the Jinchuriki, and most of the village knew. Minato's shoulders were tense. From the sounds of it, there'd been no one he could have gone to for support. Minato couldn't believe it. Where's Jiraiya-sensei? He's Naruto's godfather. A horrible thought struck him. He's alive, Sarutobi said, muffling Minato's concerns. He's stationed outside the village, overseeing his spy network. Minato felt his eye twitching. Does he come for visits? A pause. As far as I know, he and Naruto have never met. To his own surprise, Minato had to laugh. It was an ugly, brittle sound and made the shinobi around him fidget. Of course. What else? He rubbed his eyes, feeling incredibly tired. Is there anything else I should know? Nobody answered, so Minato turned towards the window. Where are you going? Minato looked at Sarutobi incredulously. To get to know my son. Nobody was stupid enough to try and stop him. Minato leaped outside the window and onto the rooftops. Kakashi had been waiting outside and fell into step beside him. Did you listen in? I did. Good. Minato could barely recognize his own voice. Show me Naruto's apartment. He would tear the entire village apart to find him, but chances were his son had gone home by now. He would try there, first. Kakashi followed his order without comment. It was silent, both of them leaping over the rooftops and ignoring the tension between them. The trip wasn't long. It's that one. Kakashi pointed to the building on the other side of the street. The neighborhood didn't look fancy, but not terrible either. Minato concentrated and felt chakra spiking inside the building, in a way that could only be explained with a Jinchuriki. Minato closed his eyes. He wanted to head over so badly. Everything inside of him screamed, knowing Naruto was close. But he needed to have a conversation with Kakashi first. He cut to the chase right away. I didn't expect you to take care of him when I died, Kakashi. Kakashi stiffened, knowing what was coming. You were 14, I wouldn't demand something like that from you. But it's been years and Naruto, Minato had to pause. He didn't even know who I was. We bumped into him on the streets, and he didn't know you either, Kakashi. How can that be? Kakashi hesitated. Minato didn't snap at him only because he could see emotions raging behind his eyes, shame and guilt and self-loathing. I don't have an excuse, he said finally. Not one that would be enough. At first I was young and grieving. Obito happened and Kakashi broke off, but Minato understood. He wondered if one of the reasons his students were miserable was each other. Had they dragged each other down, both of them blinded by their grief and pain that they hadn't noticed the downward spiral until it was too late. After that I just kept coming up with excuses. I told myself the war was more important. Then that I was too busy with ANBU. Then that Naruto would be better off without. He broke off, his voice wavering. Without someone with blood-stained hands like mine. Minato frowned, conflicting feelings raging through his gut. He wanted to wrap Kakashi in a hug and erase all the years of suffering. Another voice that sounded suspiciously like Kushina told him to punch Kakashi. You're right, Minato said. That doesn't make it okay. His eyes were dragged back to the apartment, where his son was waiting. I'm not going to lie to you, Kakashi. I'm hurt, and that's not going to go away anytime soon. Kushina and I would have considered you Naruto's older brother, and he doesn't even know you here. Kakashi flinched, wide eyes snapping up. Hadn't he known how Kushina and Minato thought of him? I'm going to get to know my son, and I'm going to do that alone. Kakashi's eyes were glued to the ground, but he nodded, accepting Minato's decision. Later, depending on how mad I still am, you and Rin will come with me and you will introduce yourself to him properly. No more excuses? Kakashi's eyes snapped up, staring at Minato in disbelief. Why yes, sensei. He sounded like he hadn't expected Minato to want him in his life anymore. Too bad for him. Kushina would want to say her piece, as well. He wouldn't get off the hook that easily. Go and tell Rin, Minato said, turning towards his son's house. She won't get out of this either. Yes, sensei. Kakashi's eyes closed in a smile, considerably more cheerful than before. He headed off, leaving Minato behind. His heart was pounding madly by the time he stood in front of Naruto's door. Excitement battled with anxiousness, and Minato felt sick to his stomach. What if Naruto didn't like him? What if he hated Minato because he hadn't been there for him? What if he didn't want anything to do with him? Get it together, Namikaze. Kushina wouldn't let herself freeze like this. She would soldier on, no matter the odds. She wouldn't let doubt stop her from meeting their son. Before he could change his mind, Minato knocked. His breath caught in his throat as the door opened, revealing a bewildered-looking Naruto. You again? How do you know where I live? Minato failed to form words. He took in every detail he had overlooked before. Naruto had Minato's eyes alongside his hair. He could recognize some of Kushina's features, but where did the whiskers come from? Were they a byproduct of the fox? What do you want, weirdo? Naruto asked, snapping Minato out of it. My name is Minato, he burst out. Minato Namikaze. Okay. Am I supposed to know who that is? Minato smiled wistfully. No. No, I suppose not. It didn't surprise him that Naruto didn't know his name, but he was still disappointed. No one had thought it necessary to tell Naruto about him or Kushina, not even in passing. He paused. Can I come in? Naruto frowned at him, hesitating. I guess? He stepped aside. Minato wasn't sure if he should scold him for letting in a stranger just like that. Oh well, the apartment was small, fitting for housing a single child. It was a bit barren, only a minimum of furniture and personal items strewn around and empty cups and packages here and there. It was obviously missing a parental figure. Minato frowned, suppressing another painful jab in his chest. Are you just gonna stand around and stare? The suspicious frown was gone, leaving Naruto looking lost. Insecure. He probably didn't get many guests, if any. Right. I'm sorry. He sat on Naruto's couch, noting with alarm that his throat had gone dry. His hands were damp with sweat. He cleared his throat, willing himself to push onwards. All right. How do I do this? He decided to start from the beginning. Do you remember when we talked before? I mentioned that I haven't been in the village for a while. It's been about 12 years now. Why were you gone? I didn't have a choice. There were things that kept me out of the village. So like a mission? A really, really long one? Something like that. Minato paused. The last time I was here was 12 years ago. The Kyuubi broke free around that time. Did you learn about that in school? Naruto nodded and Minato pressed on. I thought I'd lost my wife in the attack. And my son. Naruto didn't answer, not catching Minato's implication. Minato's fist was clenched hard enough to drive his fingernails into his palm. I found out today that my son is still alive. Why aren't you with him then? Naruto's voice was tense, either because of a sense of foreboding or refusing to acknowledge what Minato was saying. Naruto, he said, his voice catching on the name. Look at me. What do you see? Naruto stared. His eyes started to wander, taking in Minato's appearance. Cautiously. Anxiously. We have the same hair color, he said. No one in the village has that exact shade. And your eyes. Minato smiled even as he felt tears prickling behind his eyes. This is a joke, right? You're joking. Naruto leaped to his feet, clenching his fists. He glared at Minato with watery eyes. I'm your father, Naruto. Naruto stood in stunned silence, his mouth twisting like he wasn't sure which emotion to form. Minato itched to hear him say something. Anything. But he knew he had to give Naruto time. So he waited. That's not you can't be. Naruto broke off, taking a step back. You're not my father, Naruto. No. Naruto was yelling now. I don't even know my parents' names. Nobody ever bothered to tell me. I always thought they'd have to show up eventually. They'd show up and acknowledge me, but it's been 12 years and they didn't come. Nobody did. They've got to be dead or left because they didn't want me or... Naruto had to pause. He was breathing heavily. You're not him. You can't be. Minato was lost for words. He wanted to apologize and beg his forgiveness for leaving Naruto alone for so long. But how could he when Naruto didn't even believe him yet? We wanted to be there for you, but something went wrong. He cut himself off, realizing that there was no way he could explain everything to Naruto. He didn't even know what had gone wrong himself yet. Minato changed tracks and tried again. You know, he began. That is, your mother and I. Her name is Kushina. We picked your name out of a book from a dear friend of ours. She was overjoyed when she found out that she was pregnant. She couldn't wait to be a mother. He took Naruto's silence as permission to keep going. We invested hours to set up your bedroom. You can't imagine how excited we were, how much we looked forward to becoming parents. How much we looked forward to you, Naruto. I'm so sorry that it took me this long to come back. There's nothing I regret more than knowing that you had to grow up alone. Naruto continued to look at him, his stare intense like he tried to find the lies in Minato's words. Are you? Naruto's voice broke. He bit his lip, his eyes avoiding Minato. Are you going to stay this time? An adamant yes threatened to burst out of him. Minato had to remind himself that that was not a promise he could make. There's nothing I'd rather do than get to know you, and I'll do my best to spend as much time here as I can. But there's things I have to do, things that I can't ignore. I can promise you that I'll do my best. It wasn't good enough and Minato knew it. Naruto deserved more, so much more. But Minato didn't have the power to give it to him. Not yet, okay. Naruto was frowning like he didn't know what to make of Minato. He couldn't blame him. Naruto didn't know him, so he had no reason to trust him. Are you going to stay for now? For today? Minato smiled, glad for a question he could answer without hesitation. There's nothing I'd love more. Naruto brightened up a bit, fragile hope reflected in wide eyes. And he hesitated, biting his lip anxiously. Will you tell me about her? About you too, anything you want to know. But I want to know about you too. Naruto's grin brightened the entire room and made Minato feel warm. Deal, old man. Old? I'm 23, Naruto wrinkled his nose. Yeah. That's old, Minato shuddered. Don't ever say that in front of Kushina, you hear? Naruto fell silent and his expression grew unreadable. Was something the matter? Had Minato said something wrong? He stood, taking a step forward. Naruto, he grunted as a weight rammed into him, arms wrapping around his middle. Naruto was hugging him. Minato choked a tearful laugh, returning the embrace. Happiness burned in his chest, stronger than any of the pain and anger that had built up over the last few hours. It felt like his son was the only good thing in this broken future. Minato couldn't wait to tell Kushina everything. Now that Minato had met Naruto, the thought of being apart from him was agonizing. As such, he didn't return to Sarutobi to ask for a place to stay. Waking up with a stiff neck from sleeping on Naruto's lumpy couch was a small price to pay. They talked until deep into the night, too ecstatic over each other to think or care about the consequences for the next day. Minato had talked about Kushina and their life, although he left out the time-traveling bit, and asked questions in return. He could tell that Naruto didn't tell him everything, but he didn't press. He found out that Naruto took after Kushina in many ways: his bubbly personality, his love for ramen and for pranking. A lot of their time had been spent by Naruto gleefully narrating his favorite pranks, wildly gesticulating and with an energy that reminded him of Kushina even more. By the time they reluctantly went to sleep, hours had passed. It felt like he'd only slept for minutes when Minato was torn out of his sleep. Crap. Naruto came bursting out of his bedroom, half-dressed and still wearing his nightcap. He stormed through the apartment like his life depended on it, got dressed clumsily and grabbed a bag that was carelessly thrown on the kitchen counter. He was almost out of the door when his eyes fell on Minato. He stumbled and skidded to a halt. They stared at each other, taken aback. Naruto? Minato asked, swinging his legs from the couch and suppressing a yawn. What's the hurry for? You're still here. He blinked. Where else would I be? No, it's just, Naruto mumbled, his cheeks coloring. I thought it might be a dream or something. Well, I'm still here. Minato gave his son a smile. Where are you going? Just the academy. There's classes. Naruto's eyes widened. Right. I'm gonna be late. Minato hadn't thought Naruto would be one to care about things like that. I know a shortcut, you know? Less than a minute later they appeared on the street opposite of the academy, and Naruto had forgotten all about his classes. That was amazing. Did we teleport? How does that work? Can you teach me, please? Minato grinned, feeling ridiculously pleased about having impressed his son. It's called the Flying Thunder God technique. It's very advanced, but I'd love to show you the basics later. Flying Thunder God technique? That's so cool. Naruto's eyes were sparkling, his voice loud and excited. Take that, Kushina. At least someone could appreciate his amazing naming skills. Minato hated to cut their conversation short, but both of them had things to do. Weren't you worried about missing classes? Right. Iruka-sensei will have my head if I skip again. He turned, dashing off towards the academy. See you later. Minato watched him go and felt the irrational urge to run after him. He sighed, facing the group of trees planted at the street corner. He's gone. You can come out. Minato had the odd feeling of having caught one of his genin pulling a prank. But Rin was no longer a genin. She landed in front of him and looked as exhausted as the day before, disheveled and with dark bags under her eyes. There were still blood stains on her uniform. Have you slept? He couldn't help but ask, concern winning out over the disappointment still lingering in his gut. He hadn't forgiven any of them, but Rin was still his student. He couldn't watch her waste away with her self-destructive behavior. The lack of an answer told Minato all he needed to know. Rin avoided eye contact and held up a stack of documents and folders. Here, Rin, take them. They're all the reports and files about the massacre I could find. There's less about the Kyuubi attack. And some others. She shrugged, still not meeting his eyes. I took a guess what you'd want to see. Minato took the documents. Was that how she'd spent her night? Rin kept going, fidgeting and sounding more anxious with every sentence. Kakashi told me you'd want to find out as much as possible. He's doing the same, by the way. We split up. There's a lot to cover. Rin. She bit her lip, cutting off another nervous ramble. As a 12-year-old, Minato wouldn't have hesitated to pull her into a hug. But Rin wasn't 12. She'd long passed the point where a hug took care of her issues. Thank you? You have no idea how much this helps. It was worrying how glad Minato was to not have to talk to Sarutobi again. He hesitated, throwing a glance at the documents in his arms. He made a decision. Would you mind helping me go through these? Rin hesitated. If you have the time, Minato added. I mean, I'd appreciate it. Had talking to Rin ever been this awkward? Her lips twitched in a way that simply wasn't enough to be called a smile. Especially not coming from sweet, cheerful Rin. Lead the way. It was on their way back to Naruto's apartment that Minato realized that Rin, just like Kakashi, had grown older than him. The thought made him feel dizzy, and by the time they sat in the living room, paper and folders spread out around them on the floor. Minato couldn't help but sneak glances at her every few minutes. He doubted he would ever get used to this. He forced his attention back, and his eyes got stuck on the ANBU stamp plastered on the next cover sheet. So far most of them had either been taken from the library or the semi-public archives. "Were you even allowed to take these?" he asked, holding up the folder. "How did you get them out of the headquarters?" Rin looked up, her mouth curved in an echo of a grin. "I have my ways." There was a noise at the window. Kakashi slid into the room without bothering to knock. "Got room for one more?" His cheerful voice sounded stilted. Minato returned a smile and hated that it felt strained. "Feel free." Kakashi dumped another stack of documents in their midst, grabbed for one and dropped down beside them. Minato could ignore the awkwardness for a while, focusing on his goal and getting lost in words and ink. Once in a while Rin and Kakashi spoke up to comment on something they'd read, or to pass a folder they thought he'd want to see for himself. The reports were disappointing, to say the least. They barely told him anything he hadn't already heard from either Sarutobi, Genma, or his students. There was more information about the massacre than the Kyuubi attack, but no matter how many documents Minato read, he couldn't shake off the thought that something was missing. Uchiha Itachi, a single 13-year-old child prodigy slaughtering his entire clan to prove his superiority, felt wrong in a way that Minato couldn't quite explain. It went beyond the denial of a child being capable of such a horrific act. They took a break at one point, Kakashi heading out for takeout, but didn't waver from their goal otherwise. Hours passed and Minato read the same information again and again. The redundancy of it gave him a headache. Rin and Kakashi weren't finding anything new either. Minato sighed, leaned back and dragged a hand over his face. "Is there anything that the reports leave out? Anything you know?" "Nothing concrete," Kakashi said, sharing a glance with Rin and following suit in abandoning the documents. "We both knew Itachi from ANBU," Rin said. "He was incredibly talented, intelligent, and with the strength to pull it off. I don't doubt that he was capable of killing his clan. But there's something," Minato said, pushing for details. "He had the skills for it," she repeated, "but I'm not sure about his motivation. They say he wanted to prove his superiority, but Itachi as I was on a few missions with him, and he was never competitive. Striving to become stronger, sure. Most shinobi are, but competitive?" She threw a glance at Kakashi, who shrugged. "They say the stress caught up to him. I can't disprove it, but it feels odd." Minato looked down without taking anything in. If it was true, if Itachi was solely at fault for killing his clan, that was easily fixed. In various more or less pretty ways. But if it wasn't that simple? Minato needed all the information he could get. Minato stretched his sore limbs and leaned against the couch. They could all use a break. "What else have you two been up to?" "ANBU couldn't have been all." Kakashi and Rin found sudden new interest in the documents. Minato's smile faltered. "There has to be something. The Hokage has been trying to make me take on a genin team," Kakashi offered. "A genin team? But that's great." Minato's excitement dampened as Kakashi's words caught up with him. "What do you mean, trying?" Kakashi shrugged. "He hasn't shown me a team that met my standards yet, those being potential for teamwork." Kakashi avoided his glance and Minato sat back, stunned. "I suppose your lessons had to get through to me eventually." Minato couldn't place the heavy feeling in his gut. He swallowed and turned to Rin. "What about you? Have you considered taking on a team?" "Never." The vehemence in her voice hit Minato like a blow. "It came up once. I refused." Minato almost didn't want to ask. "Why?" Rin shrugged. "ANBU lets me get out of the village." In here it's like she hesitated, her voice growing quiet. "Like I'm suffocating. I need to get out." The three of them sunk back into silence, tension pressing down on them uncomfortably. Obito's absence sat in their midst heavy and impossible to ignore, a hole that left their team incomplete and unstable. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Minato tried to think of something else to talk about, but the three of them tensed as they noticed a familiar beacon of chakra coming closer. How long had they spent going through the documents? It hadn't felt like quite this long. "Right," Kakashi said, leaping to his feet. Rin followed suit, fidgeting and eyes darting to the door. "I guess that's our cue." Both of them headed for the window. Minato leaped up. "Wait." Rin and Kakashi paused, looking back at him in apprehension and surprise respectively. Minato hesitated, taking a moment to decide if he wanted to go through with this. Naruto came closer, quickly enough that he had to be running. Minato made a decision. "Stay. Please." It took only a moment for Kakashi to give in, turning from the window and giving a nod. Rin took longer. She shifted on her feet and threw glances outside like she was struggling not to flee. It was only when they heard the rattling of Naruto's key that she caved, surrendering to her fate with tense shoulders. The door swung open with a loud "Old man?" Minato suppressed a sigh and ignored Kakashi's amused glance. He was never going to live this down. "Whoa," Naruto said, entering the room with widened eyes. "What happened?" Minato winced, gaze wandering over the heaps of documents and notes strewn around the living room. He was so used to it at home, he hadn't realized what a mess they'd made. Sorry about that, Naruto. We got a bit carried away. We'll clean it up, don't worry. We? Naruto blinked, eyes narrowing at the sight of Kakashi and Rin. Who are you? Kakashi stole a glance at Minato. Rin's eyes were wide, staring at Naruto and frozen like a genin on a B rank. Minato decided to take pity on them. Naruto, this is Kakashi. He laid a hand on Kakashi's shoulder, and this is Rin. They were my students before I had to leave. Oh. Naruto shifted on his feet, not sure what to say to that. Okay, right. Minato wanted to smack himself, realizing how late it must be. You're home from the academy. You must be hungry. He didn't wait for an answer, rushing into the kitchen and peeking into the fridge and various cupboards. Countless cups of ramen and other instant food greeted him. This wouldn't do. Back in the living room nobody else had moved or made an attempt at conversation. Minato wondered how it came that he was in the sole company of socially stunted people. All right, he said, snatching an empty piece of paper and scribbling a quick grocery list. Kakashi, you're going to go to the market. Feel free to add more if you can think of anything. He handed over the list, ignoring Kakashi's stunned expression. To Rin, he said, we're gonna clean up this mess. And then you're both staying for dinner. Got it? There was silence, and Minato raised an eyebrow, daring them to protest. Finally, Kakashi flashed him a smile, accepting the list. Understood. Naruto blinked, staring after him. Why'd he use the window? The door is right here, Minato laughed. Don't worry about it. It's a shinobi thing. Hey, lady. Are you a shinobi too? Rin froze mid-motion, already starting to collect the paper. Yes, that's so cool. Naruto bounced closer, beaming at Rin with sparkling eyes. Where did you get that scar? Was it on a mission? Is that blood? Minato winced at his childish enthusiasm, and hoped that Rin would take it in a stride. Maybe inviting the two of them had been too rash. My mom was a shinobi too, you know? Yeah. I knew Kushina. You did? Naruto's eyes grew wide. Was that because you were my old man's student? Sort of. Rin hesitated, straightening up another stack of paper and putting it neatly on the table. She came to watch our training when she had the time. She brought us lunch, encouraged us, and gave tips. The corner of her lips twitched upwards. She smuggled candy and told us embarrassing stories about Minato-sensei whenever she got us for herself. Minato knocked over the stack of folders he had just collected. She did what? What kind of stories? Naruto grinned, his eyes sparkling mischievous. Rin, don't you know the teleportation technique he used to bring you to school? Naruto nodded, hanging on to her every word. It took him months to perfect it. He kept crashing into buildings until he realized it was safer to practice outside the village. Minato felt his cheeks coloring. Rin, I bet half of the D ranks the village assigned at the time were just to replace the trees he destroyed. Naruto laughed. Minato crossed his arms, pouting. You tried developing a new technique. It's not easy. Rin sent him a look that was possibly supposed to be apologetic, but looked closer to a real grin than Minato had ever seen her. With the ice broken, it was a lot easier to keep the awkwardness at bay. Kakashi joined them after they had finished cleaning up the living room. He walked into Naruto asking more questions about his mother. I got your hair in your eyes. Did I get anything from my mom? Minato gave him a fond smile. You remind me of her a lot. You have her laugh, and you both love pranking. She liked to prank people? Really? Naruto's eyes widened, voice raised in awe. Oh yes, so much. Kakashi and Rin spoke in a deadpan voice. Kakashi looked like he was suppressing a shudder. She sounds amazing. Naruto trailed off with a small smile, eyes on the table and not taking in anything. Minato wanted to say something. Naruto looked so sad, asking about the mother he had never met, but Kakashi was quicker. He dropped the grocery bags on the table and pulled something from his pocket. Here, he said, holding out a few pictures for Naruto. I stopped at my apartment to pick these up. Minato peered over Naruto's shoulder and smiled. The first picture showed Kushina in her shinobi gear, hair pulled back in a ponytail and grinning cheerfully at the camera. It took a moment until Naruto managed to form words. Is that her? Minato hummed in confirmation. That's Kushina, and this Naruto pulled out the next one. It was a picture of all five of them, Minato laughing in the background as Kushina pulled all three of his students in various states of cooperation in for a hug. My team. Here's Kakashi, here's Rin, and that's Obito. His smile dimmed. He didn't survive the war. Naruto shot him a startled look, but didn't answer. There were a few more pictures of him and Kushina, Kushina with Mikoto, Kushina alone with his team. Minato made a mental note to ask Kakashi where he'd gotten all of them. Even when Naruto was through, he didn't put the pictures away, going through them a second and then a third time. None of them wanted to break this moment for him, so Minato pulled out the groceries and started to prepare dinner. He even got Kakashi and Rin to help, thrusting a pair of knives and vegetables at them to chop. Naruto, once he was done with the pictures, asked to help with a shaky voice. By the time dinner was cooking, they had gone back to telling stories. They talked about their time as a team, about the missions they had completed, heavily censored, and of course, about Kushina. Naruto soaked in every word, and sitting at the table with his son and both of his students. Minato was convinced for the first time that he would find it in himself to forgive them. The villagers weren't stupid. Minato had been seen multiple times at this point, most notably with each of his students on 2 different occasions. His hair was a dead giveaway, as was his Thunder God technique that he may or may not have slightly overused, flashing through the village with a giggling Naruto on his back. He'd had no choice. How could he have declined with those puppy eyes pleading him? People were starting to put 2 and 2 together. There were no worse gossipers than Shinobi, and since Sarutobi hadn't declared Minato an S-rank secret, the rumors soon started to become uncomfortably close to the truth. It had only been a matter of time until the Sarutobi decided to make an announcement to the villagers, laying the rumors to rest and making Minato's presence in the village public knowledge. Minato didn't particularly care either way. Several incidents with the villagers had made it increasingly more nerve-wracking to leave the house with Naruto by his side. It made his blood boil, the way people kept trying to warn him. Namikaze-san. It's really you, isn't it? The stares, up to this point at least making the attempt to stay discreet, zoomed in on them. Listen, that boy, he's nothing but trouble. Don't you know who he is? Minato wanted to laugh at the irony. Here they were, trying to get him to avoid his own son because he was a Jinchuriki. It hadn't been the first time someone had tried to help him. Minato was amazed at how little the villagers actually knew about him. He had married a Jinchuriki, for goodness sake. You should talk to Hokage-sama, Namikaze-san. If only you knew. Minato stole a worried glance at Naruto. He frowned and stared dejectedly at the ground. Did that woman think he couldn't hear her? He was right next to Minato. Excuse me, ma'am. It made her halt in her tracks. Minato hadn't tried to keep the ice out of his voice. I know perfectly well who he is. Seeing as you clearly don't, I would appreciate it if you avoided talking to or about my son from now on. Gasps could be heard all around at the word son. Minato grabbed for Naruto's hand to lead him away, satisfaction burning in his gut. Don't listen to them, he said once they had left the crowd behind. It worried him that Naruto hadn't made an attempt to speak up. I'm sorry that they're treating you this way, but they're wrong. And as long as you're with me, I won't accept that kind of behavior. Naruto hummed, indiscernible, not raising his gaze. Naruto. Please look at me. He waited until Naruto obeyed. They're wrong. And I don't care what they say. Alright, whatever. It's not like I care. Naruto didn't sound convincing. That was alright. Minato was there to remind him as many times as he needed it. Gathering intel hadn't been any more successful since the day he'd spent going over the documents with Rin and Kakashi. Minato had pushed his negative feelings aside in order to talk to various other high-ranked shinobi, Sarutobi, the elders and Shikaku right at the top of his list, but none of them had anything new to tell him. Whether that was because they genuinely didn't have the information or because they didn't want to give it to him, Minato couldn't quite say. For lack of a better idea, he decided to consult his old teacher. Jiraiya, huh? Shikaku had said after Minato had brought up the topic. I'm afraid I can't tell you where he is. Not because it's classified, he hurried on before Minato could protest, but because I don't know. He doesn't send reports that often. Luckily, Minato could think of another way to contact him. Why do you need blood for that? Naruto asked, sitting cross-legged on the floor in front of him. That's the sacrifice needed to make the summoning successful. It doesn't work with chakra alone, and only those who sign the contract are able to use the technique. Naruto frowned, contemplating. So I could choose what contract I want to sign? I could have any kind of animal? Summon, Minato corrected, and yes, in theory. You do need someone who has already signed the contract to offer it to you. There's other ways, but those tend to be more complicated. Can you do it? Come on, show me, Minato happily obliged. Just remember, leave the talking to me, alright? The toads can be a bit, well, you'll see. He formed the required hand seals, bit his thumb and planted his palm on the floor. Symbols spread out where his hand touched the ground and a toad materialized in a puff of smoke. Of course, we only need to deliver a message for now, Minato continued. For battle, there's summons larger than buildings. Eh? What's that supposed to mean? The toad, Minato recognized him as Gammaden, sounded more than a little offended. Minato immediately realized his mistake. And nothing. I was just, are you trying to say my size makes me less of a summon? That's not what I meant at all. I guess I'll just leave. Why don't you summon one of my brothers instead, if they're so much better? Gammaden, please. Minato had nearly forgotten how sensitive some of the toads could be. Behind him, Naruto was badly hiding his snickering. I have a very important message for Jiraiya-sensei. For his eyes only. There's no toad I'd rather trust with it than you. Gammaden was as proud as he was sensible. Only me, huh? Fine. The toad hesitated, looking at Minato closer. Aren't you that Minato brat? Jiraiya's student? Haven't seen you in a while. Right, Minato said, smiling sheepishly. I was occupied. For a while. He pulled out the message he had prepared and passed it on to Gammaden. He hoped that it was proof enough for Jiraiya that Minato had been able to summon the toads, but just in case he reached for one of his special kunai as well. Tell him to send a message back if he wants to be picked up. If not, I'll expect him in a few days. Sure thing. Consider it done. Maiden straightened up proudly before disappearing in a puff of smoke. Minato sighed in relief, glad that was taken care of. As soon as the toad was gone, Naruto leaped to his feet eagerly. Are you gonna teach me that? Come on, you promised. I promised to teach you the basics, Minato reminded him gently. I think it's still a bit early for a technique like this. At least until you graduate from the academy, but I can handle it, I swear. Come on, old man, how am I supposed to become a great ninja if I don't learn any cool techniques? Minato had to smile at Naruto's antics, he couldn't help himself. Do you remember what I told you about your mother? About that one time she flooded Ti? Minato suppressed a snort at the memory. He was the Hokage. He was above such things. Not quite what I meant. Do you know what her specialty is? Huh? Oh. Naruto's eyes widened in a beaming expression. Sealing. You said she was a seal master, the very best. Minato might have gotten carried away bragging the day before. Who could blame him? His wife was awesome. Do you mean you'll teach me sealing? That's so awesome. The basics, Minato reminded him, but couldn't keep the smile off his face. And I'm being honest with you. If you genuinely want to learn, it won't be easy. Fuinjutsu is different from other shinobi techniques you can learn. There's a reason you're not taught much about it at the academy. He fetched a stack of beginner's scrolls and books he had picked up from the library earlier, and Naruto's face fell. Do I have to read those? I'm afraid so. You need to get a good grip on the theory before you can try practical exercises. If you do it wrong, fuinjutsu can be quite destructive. He didn't say that it could be destructive when done right too. In fact, sometimes its sole purpose was to be as destructive as possible. But there was no need to have him strive after Kushina quite so early on. Naruto looked at the stack of books with a pout. Apparently the prospect of learning his mother's favorite technique was stronger, because he reached for the first one. Feel free to ask if you have any questions. Minato settled down opposite of him with his notes, using the opportunity to study his seal some more. He knew that Kushina was doing the same in the past, and between the two of them he was optimistic to find a solution to stabilize it. Fuinjutsu came as easily as breathing, and soon Minato lost himself in his studies. The seal was a tangled mess, but it was fascinating. It was only after he'd filled 2 sheets of paper that he noticed how quiet it was. Too quiet, considering Naruto was in the same room. He glanced up and saw Naruto frown at his book, his lips moving quietly. He hadn't reached further than the first few pages. How's it going? Naruto didn't answer immediately, the corner of his mouth tugging downwards. He threw the book one last scowl before leaning back, crossing his arms. I don't get it, he admitted. What don't you get? Naruto gesticulated helplessly. Everything. That book is far too complicated. How's anyone supposed to get that? Okay, Minato said, picking up the book with a frown. He had chosen this particular one because it explained the fuinjutsu basics in the most simple terms possible. An academy student in his last year should have no problem understanding it. Perhaps try a different one? It was the same with the others. In the end, Minato decided to take it into his own hands. If Naruto couldn't learn what he needed to know from the books, Minato would just have to do it himself. If he wasn't able to teach his son, and Uzumaki, the fuinjutsu basics, what kind of seal master would he be? Minato tried. Over the next few days he kept taking time out of his day to try and explain to Naruto the basics of fuinjutsu, again and again in a different way each time. He could tell that Naruto was making an effort, that he was trying to understand. But no matter what they didn't get a step further. Naruto was getting frustrated. I can't do it. He tossed away the notes Minato had drawn him as demonstration, crossing his arms and scowling. His fists were clenched tightly enough to tremble. This is useless. I don't get it. Minato sighed, sitting back with a thoughtful frown. Naruto was right. At the pace they were going, it would be weeks until there was real progress. He didn't know what else to try. Minato had done his best to keep his explanations as simple as possible, and yet Naruto had trouble to grasp what looked so easy to Minato. When Minato had been Naruto's age, he'd already memorized half the library's fuinjutsu material. He was a perfectionist. He'd only started experimenting once he'd studied the basics from books and scrolls. Kushina, on the other hand, Minato paused. He resisted the urge to smack himself on the forehead. He was so stupid. I'm sorry, Naruto. What for? I'm the one who's not getting it. The frustration in Naruto's voice made Minato feel even worse than he already did. It's not your fault, he said. I got carried away. I tried to teach you the way I learned it. Studying and memorizing. Naruto stole a glance at the books. He wrinkled his nose in distaste and made Minato laugh. Yeah, I noticed you're not a fan. He took a moment to collect his thoughts, then grabbed for another piece of paper. All right. Let's try something else. Can you tell me examples of what you can use fuinjutsu for? Naruto straightened up and furrowed his brows. It's how you make explosive tags, right? Minato winced. One thought of Kushina cemented the decision that he would not trust his son with anything even remotely explosive. True. That's one option. Do you know another? He waited patiently while Naruto thought. Oh. How about storage seals? Yes. Good one, Naruto. Harmless and as simple as seals could be. Perfect. Minato sketched out the most basic storage seal after making sure that Naruto was watching. Each component serves a different purpose, he explained, and the way the seal functions changes with the smallest variation. He laid the pen at the seal's center. You activate it with chakra, and if you didn't make any mistakes the pen disappeared in a puff of smoke, safely stored. Now you try. Naruto looked at him rather alarmed. To make a storage seal? I was supposed to remember how you drew it, Minato laughed. No. Don't worry. I meant to use your chakra and activate the seal. Oh. Okay. Naruto did as he was told and managed to get the pen back easily. There. Now what? Minato dug through his mountain of notes and pulled out a sheet of paper he'd prepared earlier. It was a list of base components. Naruto caught sight of it and groaned, recognizing it. I thought we were done with the memorizing. We are, Minato said, we're trying something different. See this component? He pointed it out on the list and proceeded to alter the storage seal. Now watch. This time when the pen disappeared, the puff of smoke was dark red. I want you to take the seal and experiment for a bit. Just add or leave out certain things, and see what happens. Trial and error. It was closer to Kushina's style than his own and would, hopefully, fit Naruto better. He should have known that Naruto wasn't book smart, or naturally inclined the way Minato was. But damn him if that was going to stop him. 10 minutes later, when Naruto had caused his first, minor, explosion, Minato was having second thoughts. He didn't even know how Naruto had managed it. He definitely took after his mother. The seal in his palm gave an angry twitch, reminding him that the stasis seal he had slapped on top of it wouldn't hold forever. He hadn't dared to alter the seal itself. Even using a basic stasis seal had been a risk, but one Minato had been willing to accept. He watched Naruto play around with the storage seal, perhaps a bit too enthusiastically, and couldn't keep a frown off his face. Time was running out, and he'd have to tell Naruto the truth soon. Minato closed his eyes, clenching his fist helplessly. He had only just gotten to meet his son. He didn't want to leave. Minato was not a violent person. He was a more than capable shinobi. He hadn't become Hokage for nothing, with a flea-on-sight order in several countries, oh yes. But he wasn't fond of unnecessary violence and preferred to solve conflicts diplomatically. The more time he spent in this odd future with Naruto, the more his peaceful nature was challenged. Add to that the weariness of several sleepless nights, and Minato was uncharacteristically irritable. He hadn't dared to go to sleep since the seal had started to tug at his hand, unwilling to be caught unaware. He was surprised he had managed to suppress it so far. He knew that he couldn't postpone telling Naruto the truth for much longer. Things just kept getting in the way. Minato had practiced the conversation by himself the entire morning, carefully crafting the best way to tell Naruto that he would have to leave soon. Even worse, that he didn't know when he would be back. For all he knew, another few weeks could pass, or even more than that. He owed Naruto more than to disappear without a word of warning. By the time Naruto came home from the academy, Minato was determined to sit Naruto down for a talk and get it over with. All his resolve crumbled when he saw Naruto's trembling fists, and the frown on his face. Naruto? He stood from his place on the ground and left his notes behind. He hadn't looked at them in at least an hour, anyway. What's wrong? It's nothing, Naruto said, way too fast. He wouldn't look Minato in the eyes. Naruto never talked about the academy if he could help it. Was he being bullied? Minato hadn't seen anything happen personally, but that didn't mean much. Or maybe Naruto wasn't doing as well in his classes as he could. Are you having trouble in class? Naruto winced. Bingo. Minato had noticed that Naruto couldn't read very well, something he had found out only after he tried to make him study fuinjutsu through books. He wondered how different it could have been with someone there to teach Naruto, someone he could have fallen back on and to support him when he needed it. Have people been giving you trouble? Naruto scowled. Like I care. They're all stupid anyway. What exactly are they doing? Naruto shrugged, still not looking at him. I'm supposed to live up to your name or whatever. Is that what they've been saying? Minato sighed, dragging his hand through his hair. He was not an easy person to be compared to. It's not a big deal, Naruto muttered. Naruto, it's not a big deal. Naruto yelled, his fists clenched and his voice trembling. With anger? Frustration? Minato couldn't quite tell. Before he could think of anything to say, Naruto stormed into his bedroom, leaving Minato to contemplate whether he should go after him or leave him alone for a while. Naruto had never lashed out at him before, but surely that wasn't out of the ordinary for a teenager? He had only his genin team to go by. Minato frowned, deciding that maybe Naruto just needed a bit of time for himself. He'd get the hang of this parenting thing eventually. It was only later at the library that he realized he had forgotten to have the talk. Again. But he couldn't stop now. He was in the middle of studying a new lead concerning the seal. There was no way he could leave just like that. He would just have to finish this quickly and track down Naruto immediately after. A few hours later Minato was torn out of his studies by Kakashi. Minato! He called out as soon as he caught sight of him. There you are. Kakashi's tone of voice put Minato on edge. What's wrong? Naruto is gone. Gone? What do you mean gone? Kakashi nearly stumbled over his words, quickly as he tried to get them out. He stole a forbidden scroll from the archives. The Hokage sent out shinobi to find him. They'd been looking for a while, but so far no luck. Minato leaped up, abandoning his notes and research papers in a heap. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I found out myself just now. I suspect the others didn't know where to find you. Minato suppressed the curse, grabbed Kakashi's arm and teleported. Did it count as overprotective to put a Thunder God's seal on his son? Oh well, they appeared in the forest. Minato felt his blood boil as he caught sight of Naruto, bruised, dirty and cowering behind a tree. His eyes widened as they fell on Minato. Dad! Irika-sensei, Minato followed his glance. Two shinobi were fighting behind Naruto's hiding place. Either of them seemed injured, but the fight was getting more intense by the second. Minato dashed forward and had both of them immobilized and bound with ninja wire in the wink of an eye. He knelt back down next to Naruto, checking him for injuries. The two figures bound and gagged behind him could be glad when he didn't find any serious ones. What happened? Minato winced. That had come out harsher than he had planned. Naruto winced and avoided eye contact instead of answering. Naruto, Minato said softer this time. The graduation exam was today. Naruto burst out. Minato blinked, both in surprise and confusion. A tiny spark of hurt flared up in his chest at his son not inviting him. Or even mentioning it. Why didn't you tell me? I failed, alright? They were right. I didn't want you to watch. To Minato's alarm, he could see tears forming in Naruto's eyes. Who's right? Just people. Minato grabbed one of Naruto's wrists, squeezing it reassuringly. Is this about what we talked about before? Naruto grimaced, but nodded. He still wouldn't meet his eyes. Naruto, please. Minato waited until Naruto was looking at him. Tell me? Just. They say someone like you deserves someone better. That you were a prodigy, and that you shouldn't have such a failure as a son. Naruto's voice faltered and made fury churn in Minato's gut. He pressed it down. His feelings were justified, but right now Naruto didn't need his anger. None of that matters to me, he said gently. They shouldn't have said that. But why did you steal the scroll? Kakashi chimed in, making Naruto frown. It was Mizuki-sensei, that bastard. He lied to me. Told me I'd only have to master a technique from the scroll and they'd have to let me graduate. He hesitated. Irika-sensei found out. Mizuki-sensei just wanted the scroll for himself. Naruto's mouth twisted, holding back words he didn't want to speak out loud. Please, Naruto. Minato put a hand on his son's shoulder and squeezed. Tell me everything? He told me about the fox. Naruto's voice had changed. It was stiff, cutting off before he could ask the questions Minato saw in his eyes. Minato sighed, admitting defeat. He had planned to have this conversation days ago, but he wished the circumstances were different. There's something I need to tell you. As soon as we're home, I promise. Naruto hesitated, then nodded. Kakashi, Minato said, please bring Naruto to the hospital. I'll take care of the rest. He took a look at his two prisoners. He sent a sheepish look to his son. Which one of them is Irika? Naruto pointed at the brown-haired of the two. Irika-sensei was so cool. He fought Mizuki-sensei to save me. It looked like Minato would have to apologize for his rough treatment. Oh well. Oh, before you go, Minato said, stopping Kakashi in his tracks. Naruto. Did you manage to master one of the techniques? Naruto's face split into a grin. I did. Minato matched his expression and ruffled his hair. Nice job. See you at your apartment. Kakashi dashed off, taking Naruto with him and leaving Minato with the scroll and the two still bound shinobi. It was only then, after his son had already disappeared with Kakashi, that Minato belatedly realized something. Naruto had called him dad. Kunai in hand and approaching the two bound shinobi, Minato had to smile. Much to Minato's frustration, he couldn't simply deliver Mizuki to Ti and leave the rest to Irika. They would not budge on keeping him involved, both because he had been the one to apprehend Mizuki, and because it had been his son who had fallen victim to him in the first place. At least Minato had been able to thank Irika for saving Naruto, although to his great alarm, the teacher had looked close to fainting after Minato had finished. Apparently he was not yet used to the idea of the fourth Hokage running around the village, much less thanking him for saving his son. It got even more annoying when Minato was told that they need him the next day, too, right at the time, as it turned out, when Kakashi would be testing his potential new genin team, which included Naruto. Not that Naruto knew anything about that yet. By the time noon had passed, Minato was finally free to leave Ti and hurry outside, eager to teleport home. He was anxious to know how it had gone. Kakashi hadn't told him what kind of test he would use, but Minato could take a guess. He still had to sit down with Naruto to have their talk. At this point it was getting ridiculous how it kept being postponed. The universe wouldn't stop conspiring against him and, yet again, put an obstacle in his way. Minato. Minato stiffened and put on a neutral expression. Sensei. Jiraiya didn't look well. His hair was unkempt and his clothes ruffled, dark shadows under his eyes giving him an air of exhaustion. He looked like he had traveled all the way to Konoha without a single day of rest. I gave you the kunai for a reason. I could have picked you up. Jiraiya shrugged. I thought the trip would be a good idea. He hesitated, then added, a dead student doesn't come back to life every day. Jiraiya believed him, then. Minato wondered how long he had argued with the toads upon receiving his message, trying to find an explanation other than the truth. Minato, why weren't you here? That took Jiraiya aback. What? Jiraiya was unnerved by his emotionless expression, Minato could tell. He couldn't bring himself to care. Naruto was right here. Growing up on his own. Where were you? Jiraiya winced. Minato, look, he broke off with a sigh. I don't have an excuse. Yeah, Minato said, dragging his hand through his hair. I've heard the same thing from Kakashi. He caught Jiraiya's gaze. A small part of him wanted his next words to hurt, except he was a 14-year-old boy. You were an adult and Naruto's godfather. Jiraiya flinched. His voice shrank to a whisper. I deserve that. Most of Minato's anger evaporated. He didn't have the desire nor the energy to fight about this. He was just so tired. I don't have time for this. There's a reason I asked you to come. Minato needed answers. The more information he had about what had gone wrong in this horrible future, the bigger was the chance for him to change it. Even if Jiraiya had been outside the village at the time, Minato couldn't imagine him not keeping up to date with what was going on in Konoha. Despite everything, he was one of the few people Minato trusted to tell him the truth. The situation back then wasn't easy, Jiraiya admitted. The Uchiha standing in the village was deteriorating, most people could see that. Are you saying the stress of it all could have been too much for Itachi? That felt like a weak reason for slaughtering an entire clan. It might have been part of it. Jiraiya looked into the distance, thoughtfully. I wasn't there myself, so I can't tell you for sure. I do know that Itachi wasn't just an ANBU. Up until he went mental, he received orders right from the top. The elders tend to forget that their shinobi are still human. Jiraiya might have had a point. From the sounds of it, Itachi was put into a position with his clan on one side, and Konoha on the other. Had the decision been too much for him to handle? What else has been going on? Minato asked. I suppose you mean beyond the village borders. Jiraiya paused, directing a thoughtful glance into the distance. Our so-called peace is as fragile as it can get. Kiri is still recovering from a civil war, but the other villages are itching to start another conflict. He caught Minato's glance. That includes Konoha. They took to the rooftops, away from curious ears. Minato directed them towards Naruto's apartment. That's not even mentioning the minor villages. They're growing restless, Minato. Too much blood spilled within their borders. I have my eyes set on AIM right now, and it's not looking good. AIM? Minato asked. Isn't that where? Yeah. Jiraiya sighed. I lost track of them years ago. With so much going on, they might easily be dead. He chuckled humorlessly. You have no idea how much I regret not keeping in contact. Perhaps it wasn't too late for that either. Minato realized that 3 orphan children most likely wouldn't matter in the grand scheme of things. But if it would put Jiraiya more at ease, Minato could at least try. Your turn, Jiraiya said. You haven't told me yet how it can be that I'm talking to you at all. Minato raised his palm, letting Jiraiya take a look. Fuinjutsu technique gone wrong. The seal activated on its own and burned itself into my palm. Whenever it starts tugging, Minato trailed off, staring at his palm in horror. Minato? What? Jiraiya yelped as Minato grabbed his arm and teleported straight into Naruto's apartment. Naruto almost fell off the couch, still not quite used to the technique. D-Dad? Who's that? There's no time. Minato took a breath. This is Jiraiya, your godfather. Yes, I know, he cut off Naruto's interruption, his son's eyes wide with surprise, but you'll get to know him now. He'll take care of you for a bit. I will what? You heard me. Minato pierced him with a glance, not leaving room for protest. Jiraiya owed him this much. The seal grew hotter, shaking off the last effects of the stasis seal. Minato leaped up to gather the most important notes he had collected. He started to speak faster. I'm sorry, Naruto. I haven't told you everything. I can't stay any longer. This, he held up his hand, is leaving me no choice. What? You're leaving? Naruto stared at him in disbelief. But will you be back? Minato finished stuffing the paper in his bag and swept the room with one last glance. Not finding anything else important, he dropped down next to Naruto. I will, but I can't say when. He pulled Naruto into a hug, feeling him go stiff instead of returning it. The seal was hot enough to hurt. Tell Kakashi and Rin what happened, he forced out, not even sure if he was talking to Jiraiya or to Naruto. But wait! Naruto yelled, and it was tearing Minato apart. You can't leave now. I just had my graduation test, the real one. Why do they call the other one graduation exam if it's not, anyway? And guess what? It was Kakashi. I mean, Kakashi-sensei. And we did it. I have to tell you about it, you can't leave. Minato's eyes prickled. The corner of his mouth tugged down, making his smile feel forced. I'm sorry, Naruto. I'm so proud of you, you have no idea. But I don't have a choice. But you'll come back? I will. Just wait for me. Keeping the smile on his face hurt, but Minato tried his best. The seal was ablaze and Minato felt a yank. Before it could whisk him away, he felt a weight crashing into him. Everything was a blur. Gravity didn't exist. The familiar feeling of dizziness kicked in as Minato lost track of his surroundings. Something was different. Something was wrong. He realized that at this rate he would crash into a stranger's house. The seal he had placed in Kushina and his apartment tugged at his senses, barely within range, and he reached for it, changing direction. The world zoomed back into focus and Minato crashed to the floor in the middle of their apartment. Minato. You're here. His head was still spinning, but Minato felt like he should be insulted at the lack of enthusiasm in Kushina's voice. He looked up and froze. Staring at him were Kushina and Makoto, both sitting on their couch, holding teacups. Hello, Makoto, he brought out, going for cheerful and missing by a mile. You're back from your mission. Hello, Minato. You look well for someone supposedly bedridden. Next to her, Kushina looked conflicted between burying her face in her hands and breaking out into hysterical laughter. Do tell, Makoto went on, still in that pleasant, polite tone of voice that felt ridiculous considering he was still lying on the ground in an undignified heap. Why is there a kid lying on top of you? Just like that, all the remaining fog cleared. Minato's head snapped down and there, sprawled over his stomach and looking as dazed as he felt, was Naruto. His son gave a moan and looked like he wouldn't get up any time soon. Minato let his head fall back to the ground. I can explain, he said weakly. Dad. Where are we? Makoto and Kushina's eyes widened at the word dad. Kushina's teacup slipped out of her grasp and shattered on the ground. It was at this point that Minato accepted his fate. His wife was going to kill him. Minato was lucky that both of the people present to witness his and Naruto's arrival were shinobi. Shinobi did not lose their composure easily. As such, the revelation was not met with either hysterical screaming or fainting. Kushina put together two and two quickly. She was one of the smartest people Minato knew, and it wasn't difficult to deduce that the child he'd brought from the future who had her face and Minato's hair was theirs. Unfortunately, while Kushina was a splendid liar, her skills of deception went flying out the window when attempted to be utilized against her best friend. All right. Minato, what did I tell you about trying to teleport while you're still sick? Her scolding tone fell flat. Her eyes were far too wide and fixed on Naruto. The spilled tea had formed a puddle at her feet. Kushina, Makoto said. What's going on? What do you mean? The kid, Makoto deadpanned. He called Minato dad. Minato cheated on me, Kushina blurted out. Makoto arched a graceful eyebrow. Minato? Please. Besides, the boy can't be younger than 10. Minato would have had to be 13. That was the moment Naruto decided to chime in as well. I'm 12. He would have had to be 11, Makoto corrected. Minato could tell that it was a lost cause. He heaved a sigh, nudged Naruto off of him gently and sat up. It's alright, Kushina. Oh, thank God, Kushina sighed, dropping the pretense and leaping off of the couch to join them on the floor. She flopped down next to Naruto with a beaming smile. It's you, isn't it? You're Naruto. Naruto, his gaze still slightly foggy, leaned away from the over-enthusiastic stranger. Yeah? Who are you? Kushina squealed. There was no better word for it. Lurched forward and took Naruto's face between her hands to take a close, far too close, look. Figured. Of course you'd get most from him, that's just typical. Lucky about the eyes, no one has a prettier eye color, you know. Too bad about the hair. How did he win out over the Uchiha genes? That's just not fair, you would have made a marvelous redhead. You Dad? Minato bit his lower lip to keep himself from laughing out loud. Naruto shot him a help-seeking glance, not daring to pull away from who must seem like a lunatic to him. Kushina, dear. Maybe introduce yourself first. You're scaring him. Scaring him? I'm not scaring, Kushina broke off as she took in Naruto's wide-eyed stare and pouted. She did, however, let go of Naruto's face. Her pout only grew worse when Naruto scrambled backwards, bringing distance between them and planting himself next to Minato. Who's that crazy lady? Kushina drew an indignant breath. Crazy? Who are you calling crazy? Kushina. Sweetheart. Introductions first, don't you think? Wait. Naruto stared up at him, then back at Kushina with rapidly widening eyes. You keep calling her Kushina. Does that mean? Is that? Kushina sobered up. She dropped to her knees and beamed widely. Minato thought he could see her eyes dampening. Hello, Naruto. My name is Kushina Uzumaki. I'm your mother. For a moment, Naruto didn't react. He stood frozen, eyes wide and mouth open with no sounds coming out. Minato could tell that Kushina was getting nervous. Her smile began to falter, insecurity creeping into her frame and making her shift restlessly. I'm sure Minato told you about me. He did, didn't he? Still, I know this is a lot. I have no idea what it feels like. I thought you were dead until today. Dead in your version, you're not even born here, and Luckily, Kushina broke off at Minato frantically waving his hands behind Naruto's back. Before he got around to breaching the topic of time travel to Naruto, it was probably not a good idea to mention that Kushina was currently pregnant with him. Naruto? He asked gently, laying a hand on Naruto's shoulders when he still wouldn't say anything. I have a mom. Naruto's voice was nothing but a whisper, but it was enough to make Kushina straighten up and send warmth through Minato's chest. The impossibility of the situation caught up with Kushina, and disbelief crept into her voice. And I have a son. Naruto's face split into a grin, and he launched himself at Kushina. I have a mom, Naruto, Kushina brought out as she caught him, arms closing around him in a firm hug. She laughed, disbelief and wonder caught up in it, and the most wonderful sound Minato had ever heard. This was his family. The first time that all of them were together. All of them, plus Mikoto. Minato's attention was drawn back to her, as she discreetly removed herself from the heartwarming meeting, walking towards their kitchen. Mikoto? Where are you going? Mikoto turned, a pleasant smile on her face and ever so collected despite the surreal scene going on in their living room. Refilling my cup. I have the feeling we will be here for a while. So we're in the past? He's from the future? Naruto stared at Minato with wide eyes, and even Mikoto's composure had begun to crumble. Minato could probably be glad that no one had declared him mental yet. I wasn't lying about the training accident, he said, showing Mikoto the palm of his hand. That's exactly what happened. Mikoto raised an eyebrow. You simply left out the part of being transported to an entirely different time period. Minato went for an appeasing grin and missed spectacularly. Kushina, on the other hand, was entirely unapologetic. The first time it happened we didn't know anything about the seal. For all we knew it could have been an isolated event. She raised an eyebrow. Besides, do you really want to know what some of the council members would have wanted us to do with it? Point taken. Mikoto took a moment to collect herself. Are you planning to keep it a secret? I don't think we can. At least not for much longer. Minato sighed. Some of the problems that have to be fixed are just too big for one person alone. Like? Mikoto asked. Minato thought of empty streets and empty houses, the Uchiha crest a relic of the past. A lump formed in his throat. Not here, he murmured with a pointed look towards Naruto. Naruto, who looked at them like they were all crazy. We're in the past? Minato gave him a, hopefully, calming smile. I'm afraid so. Naruto frowned like he was trying to put together a particularly difficult puzzle. So when you said that you were gone for 12 years, I was. I came from here from this time. I couldn't control how far the seal would bring me. But why aren't you there in my time? Naruto frowned, and Minato shared a glance with Kushina and Mikoto. This wasn't a subject he looked forward to discuss, but how could he not? Naruto deserved an answer. Nobody told me anything about you. I didn't even know your names until you told me. Nothing? Mikoto asked. You didn't know anything about your parents? I know now that they're super badass ninja. Naruto practically glowed, making Kushina beam and Minato smile proudly. They definitely are, Mikoto said. Right until you get to know them. After the fifth fuinjutsu-related explosion you start to realize what a miracle it is that the village is still standing. Especially since they started living together. And Mikoto. Kushina sputtered, her smirk fading into a look of betrayal. Don't listen to her, Naruto. We're awesome. Well, I am. He's a nerd. Minato glowered at them half-heartedly. He couldn't believe they were ganging up on him. At least they'd made Naruto laugh. Unfortunately, it wasn't enough to distract him. But why weren't you there? He looked away with a frown. Is it because you're dead? Minato sighed. Naruto Mizuki told you about the fox, didn't he? Next to him, Kushina straightened up. What else did he tell you? Naruto's frown deepened. He said that you were the one who sealed it inside of me. Which is weird because I always thought the Yondaime did it, but whatever. He was right, wasn't he? Why did you do it? Why me? How long had Naruto asked himself these questions? Even before he knew about the Ninetales, before he knew the reason for his isolation. Minato owed him, he sighed. Yeah. Mizuki was right. But so is what you heard before. He cracked a weak smile. I'm the Yondaime. Naruto's eyes widened. You're the? But that means oh. The spark of excitement vanished before it could fully form. They say the Yondaime died after sealing the fox. Out of the corner of his eyes, he saw Mikoto stiffen. I'm sorry, he said, taking Naruto's hand and squeezing it. That's what people have been telling me, too. It hasn't happened to me yet, and it's not going to. Kushina scooted closer to them, a look of determination on her face. We know what's going to happen, what was supposed to happen, so we can stop it. And we will. Naruto didn't react. He met Kushina's eyes, took in the certainty of her words. The confidence in her expression. He turned his head to look at Minato, and he hurried to give Naruto a reassuring glance. Finally, Naruto nodded. Okay. The solemn atmosphere shifted as a smile found its way back to his expression. Can you tell me more stories about you? At once, it hit Minato how exhausted he was. The several sleepless nights had taken their toll, as had the excitement of Mizuki, and Naruto's accidental trip into the past. There was so much left they had to take care of. Minato stifled a yawn and Kushina caught his gaze. She snorted. Looks like your father is about to drop. Go ahead, she nodded towards their bedroom. Catch some sleep. You sure? Minato didn't want to leave. He wanted to soak it all in, wanted to spend as much time as he could with all of them together. But as of now, he would probably fall asleep on the floor if he didn't move. Yeah, why not? You got your share of bonding with him already. Kushina grinned and ruffled Naruto's hair before he managed to lean away. Now it's my turn. Minato mustered enough energy to send Kushina an unimpressed look. Kushina, go on. Don't worry about us. We'll have a great time, Minato admitted defeat with a sigh. On his way to the bedroom he came to terms with the fact that by morning, Naruto would know about all the embarrassing stories about him Rin and Kakashi had yet left out. With Kushina's voice still in his ear, enthusiastic and so excited, he couldn't bring himself to care. Minato closed the bedroom door with a smile. It was the next day, and with Naruto dead to the world on the couch, Minato finally had the chance to fill in Kushina and Mikoto on the less pleasant details of his trip. They took the news of the Uchiha massacre stoically, Mikoto with an expression carved of stone and Kushina with wide eyes and a grim line to her mouth. Minato hesitated when it came to reveal the culprit. Stop it, Minato. Mikoto's voice was sharp and left no room for protest. You're thinking of hiding something. Don't. I don't know all the details, Minato warned. This is what people told me. I don't know how much of it is the truth, or how much is missing. Mikoto nodded, curt and accepting. She visibly steeled herself for what Minato was about to say. They said Itachi did it? He paused as Kushina gasped and Mikoto's back went rigid. Jiraiya, Rin and Kakashi all suspect that there was more behind it, but while his motives are somewhat sketchy, everyone seems to agree that it was Itachi. Mikoto's mouth formed a white line. Why? Why would he? I've been told he was an ANBU. Apparently he received orders from the very top. And before the massacre, there was turmoil between the Uchiha and the rest of the village. Mikoto looked away. There's already been disagreements, she muttered. Some arguments. Animosity between clans. It's nothing new, but you're saying it will escalate to such a degree? People have been very tight-lipped about it, Minato admitted. All they could tell me were speculations. That the stress was too much for him to handle. Mikoto huffed a laugh, brittle and humorless. And so he decided to kill his clan and family? Because of stress? I'm only telling you what I heard. Mikoto clenched her fists, a rare sign of emotion. I know. Forgive me. I don't believe it either, Kushina said, taking Mikoto's hand and squeezing. There's something missing. Someone didn't want anyone to know that they were involved. There's plenty of Konoha nin who would prefer the Uchiha out of the picture, Mikoto said, bitterness in her voice and stubborn eyes daring them to disagree. And an operation like that would have had to have been massive, Minato said thoughtfully. If we assume that somebody planned the massacre, it couldn't have been over a short period of time. When is it supposed to happen? Kushina asked. Only a few years from now. Are you considering that whoever is responsible has already started planning? Mikoto asked, doubt painting her voice. Maybe not, Minato allowed. But the intention must already be there. Nobody decides to wipe out an entire clan on a whim. They fell into silence, each of them lost in their own thoughts. I might have an idea, Minato said, slowly sitting up. It might not work, but until I can go back and try from the other end. If there's a chance it will save my clan, Minato, tell me. Minato met Mikoto's eyes and saw fire in them, determination, protectiveness and a glimmer of fear. He set his jaw and they shared a moment of understanding. If the three of them had any say in it at all, the Uchiha clan would live. And so they schemed, alone in their knowledge of the nearing catastrophe. But if the three of them weren't able to come up with a solution, who else would? Thank you for coming on such short notice, Minato said. I've summoned you in private because what I'm about to tell you is highly classified. The safety of the village may depend on it. Do you understand? Ibiki returned his gaze stoically. Yes, Hokage-sama. Inoichi raised an eyebrow. Naturally, Sarutobi sighed. Of course, Minato. Although it looks like my retirement is not meant to be, apologies, Sarutobi-san. Minato swallowed down the remainder of bitterness lingering from the Sarutobi of the future. But I assure you, you'll want to know about this. Is this related to your disappearance several days ago, Hokage-sama? Katsumi asked. Minato looked his ANBU commander in the eyes. It is. Although as of now, I am not able to share all of the details. Ibiki's mouth tightened. I failed to see how I can be of use while lacking vital information. I'm asking you to have faith, Minato said, while I'm trusting in your position at TI, your connection to the other clan heads, your expertise in village politics to gain insight on the matter. Of course, Hokage-sama, Danzo said. I have served Sarutobi for years. I will gladly offer my skill set and my experience to you. Minato's expression betrayed nothing. I am reluctant to say that I suspect a traitor within the Uchiha clan. Possibly a group. A traitor? The Uchiha? How long have you suspected? Katsumi asked, her spine rigid. Not long, Minato said. And I need you to keep quiet about it. The information cannot leak, otherwise we risk alerting the traitor and losing our chance to identify them. Of course, Inoichi said, a glimmer of doubt in his eyes. I'll keep my eyes open. I will alert you at once, Ibiki said with a stoic bow. Shikaku said nothing, scrutinizing Minato with a sharp glance. He didn't let his expression waver, waiting out Shikaku's response patiently. You will have your reasons to keep secrets, Shikaku said. I trust you to come clean when you need to. He muffled a yawn. Feel free to take your time with that. With that he rose and left, leaving Minato to suppress a smile. Alright, Minato said, closing the door behind him. He turned to Kushina and Makoto with a smirk. Now, let's wait and see who rises to the bait. They made the decision to keep Naruto hidden from the village and turned his hair black with a lasting hinge. Without his sunshine-colored hair, his resemblance to Minato was a lot more subtle, and with his whisker marks it was easy to write him off to some minor clan. It was Makoto who offered to vouch for Naruto. If someone asked, they would tell them that Naruto was a distant cousin of hers, the result of a long-forgotten affair of one of her family members outside of Konoha. Catching up with his duties as the Hokage was tedious as always, although it could have been far worse. Kushina had done a splendid job while he was gone, not that Minato had ever doubted her. Kushina herself, unsurprisingly, spent most of her time at home, with Naruto. The two of them thrived in each other's company, although their mutual mischievous streak made Minato worry about Naruto's cover as well as about how long their apartment would remain intact. Kushina, please, he said when he found the two of them on the floor, engulfed in what looked suspiciously like an advanced, and incredibly creative, explosive tag. You can't teach our 12-year-old son destructive techniques like that. Kushina blinked. Why not? Dad. Dad, look. Minato turned his head. His eyes widened. He snatched the tag out of Naruto's hands and leaped back before it could blow up in his son's face. It blew up in Minato's, instead. Kushina doubled over from laughing as Minato spit out the bright orange powder that now covered his face. And most of his clothes. And their living room floor. I told you he'd fall for it. Kushina dissolved into another bout of laughter, leaning on a giggling Naruto. Naruto laughed, his eyes twinkling with the same glee as his mother. Yeah, Minato said, ruffling his hair to shake off the worst of the mess. His lips twitched. Very funny. Whose idea was it? Mine, Kushina shamelessly admitted. But he made the tag all on his own. You did? Minato's face split into a grin. Well done, Naruto. Naruto beamed with pride, and it made it worth every minute that Minato spent getting rid of the powder afterwards. He was silently glad that he had managed to make all traces of it disappear by the time Makoto showed up at their door. She brought along her youngest son. Hello, Makoto, he greeted before leaning over the small bundle that was Sasuke. And hello, Sasuke. Sasuke stared up at him with an unimpressed glare. Still not warming up to strangers, is he? Strangers? Makoto chuckled, walking past him into the apartment. He threw a tantrum the last time Fugaku tried to hold him. The only one he actually likes is his big brother. Isn't that right, Sasuke? Sasuke didn't deign to answer her. He's been holding up alright during your mission? It was only 3 days. Fugaku managed just fine. She settled down on their couch with Sasuke in her lap. Tell me, where's... Get back here, you brat! Never mind. Naruto came sprinting into their living room and almost ran Minato over in the attempt to hide behind him. Dad! Save me! What did you do? Minato turned to shield Naruto from his furious mother. Naruto swallowed. Well, he tried to prank me. Kushina yelled, sliding to a halt in front of them. Me? Can you believe it? I wasn't fast enough, Naruto admitted with a pout. He's your son, Makoto said with a smile. What did you expect? Oh, hey Makoto, Kushina said. Her eyes immediately zoomed in on the baby. Oh, you brought Sasuke. Hello, Sasuke. Do you remember me? She proceeded to make faces to try and make him laugh. She was as unsuccessful as Minato had been. Naruto's eyebrows shot upwards. Did you say Sasuke? Do you know him? Makoto surrendered to Kushina and let her pull Sasuke out of her arms. Naruto stared, shell-shocked at seeing his former, or future, classmate as an infant. Kind of? They'd been assigned to the same genin team, Minato added. Predictably, Kushina's face lit up. Really? Oh, I knew it. This was just destined to happen. Makoto and I have been best friends for years, you know. She stepped closer, holding Sasuke closer to a less than enthusiastic Naruto. Here, why don't you hold him? She didn't wait for Naruto's answer, or rather, ignored his sputtered protests, and ushered him towards the couch, dropping Sasuke on his lap as soon as he was seated. At least she remembered to show him how to support Sasuke's neck. Despite this, Naruto looked equally apprehensive and weirded out. Ah. Kushina took a step back, marveling at the image. I knew they'd become best friends. Minato thought back to Naruto's close-to-daily tirades complaining about the other boy. In the present, Naruto was wrestling with baby Sasuke to keep him from wriggling from his lap, cursing under his breath all the while. Alright, any news? Makoto asked, talking about their plan from the day before. It sounded more like a courtesy. They all knew that it was too early for anyone to rise to the bait. Not yet, Minato said. But before I forget, there's something I wanted to ask you. Makoto nodded for him to continue. I'd like to assign Itachi as Jiraiya's apprentice. It was the best solution Minato had been able to come up with, given the limited information about the massacre he had. Having taught Minato himself, Jiraiya had experience dealing with child prodigies. Minato trusted him with his life, and he definitely trusted him to keep Itachi away from the conflict that would begin brewing between Konoha and the Uchiha. He's 4, Makoto said, raising an eyebrow. I don't mean immediately, Minato assured her. Later, once he finishes the academy. Mikoto didn't speak for a while, and Minato didn't push. Hopefully, she would have plenty of time to think about it before having to make a decision. She threw a glance towards Naruto to make sure he was still distracted. Do you think that would prevent it? She asked, keeping her question vague and lowering her voice. Maybe, Minato said. I can't promise it. Jiraiya would take him along on his trips, so at the very least he would spend parts of his childhood away from Konoha. Away from the conflict, he didn't say. Away from the toxic environment that the village had become for child prodigies. I will think about it, Mikoto allowed eventually. When is the next time Jiraiya returns to the village? I can't say for sure, Minato said, but unless he's in the middle of a major operation, I can send a summon for him. You can talk to him yourself and decide then, Mikoto nodded. If you would. Dad Naruto's whine pulled Minato away from the conversation. Naruto was still holding an increasingly fussy baby Sasuke, his gaze nothing short of pleading for Minato to save him. Mikoto was quicker. Thank you, Naruto. You've done well. She picked Sasuke out of Naruto's clumsy hold, making Naruto deflate with relief. He'd probably never held a baby before in his life. Sasuke wasn't the only connection Naruto had to his own time. Naruto, Minato said before something else could come up, you remember Rin and Kakashi, right? Course I do, Naruto said. Right. I forgot. You didn't get to see, but Kakashi-sensei's my Jonin teacher now. He told us he got the bell test from you, is that true? With everything that had happened, Minato had almost forgotten that Naruto had already finished his graduation exam. Kakashi's your Jonin instructor? Kushina asked, beaming at their son. He made us wait hours until we could take his stupid test, Naruto grumbled. Kushina's eyes widened. Kakashi did? He was late for the academy, too, Naruto said, scowling. We were the last team to be picked up. We always have to wait on him when he's late. We're talking about the same Kakashi here? Kushina said, throwing a doubtful glance at Minato. Afraid so, Minato said, smiling. Naruto, would you like to meet him? And Rin and Obito? Naruto's eyes widened. Meet Kakashi-sensei? Here? Minato hummed in confirmation. He's just a teenager now. You'll be surprised how much he's changed. It would give Minato the opportunity to study the effects of the changes he'd made. He'd gotten a small taste of it with Genma and Kakashi. Genma had told him about Rin's death on his first trip, and been confused, almost disoriented, when Minato had brought it up on the second. Similarly, Kakashi's hand had twitched towards his eye when Minato had brought up Obito. Even though the second time around, he had never lost his own eye. It seemed as though they knew on some level that something was different, that something was wrong, but did not realize until somebody pointed it out to them. What would happen with an even bigger change? Kakashi could not possibly forget meeting Naruto in the past, could he? Are you going to tell them? Mikoto asked, drawing Minato out of his thoughts. I was going to. Why, do you think I shouldn't? Mikoto's eyes slipped to the side, thoughtfully. Our trap will fail if the truth comes out too early. She hesitated, adjusting Sasuke in her grip. I trust your judgment. If you think your team can keep the secret, go ahead. We can trust them, Kushina said, her voice filled with conviction. If we ask them to be quiet, they will be. Even Obito can act professional if he wants to. Right. Obito. Minato felt a twitch in his chest at the reminder that he hadn't been able to prevent one of his students' death. He'd been successful with Rin, sort of, seeing as the person he met in the future was hardly the same he'd known, so why had he failed with Obito? What did he have to do to find all three of them alive and well, once he returned? I'm gonna fetch them, Kushina said, already on her way out of the door. We've got a cover story, but no need to test our luck. With that she whisked out, leaving the three of them, four, if they counted Sasuke, behind. What are you going to do about Obito? Mikoto asked, correctly interpreting Minato's silence. I don't know anyone called Obito, Naruto chimed up. Is he the one who died? Yeah. Minato sighed. I don't know yet. I tried keeping them inside the village, but I can't make sure they're obeying when I'm not here. It's a lot to ask, Mikoto said, keeping three capable graduates away from the front lines when Konoha needs every shinobi it can spare. I know. It was the only reason he hadn't asked Mikoto to do so herself. It would be difficult to justify a request like that to anyone else. Minato looked up to meet Naruto's eyes. Do me a favor and don't mention it to them, okay? I don't want Obito to know what will happen before I can come up with a solution. Uncharacteristically solemn, Naruto met his gaze and nodded. Okay. I won't. It wasn't much later that loud arguing announced Kushina's and Team 7's arrival. Minato wished that the sound of it wasn't quite as familiar to him as it was. Admit it, jerk. I totally mastered that technique faster than you. If by mastered you mean flung enough kunai that some of them had to hit, then yes. You've definitely mastered it first. Boys, please. Rin's voice was strained with barely suppressed exasperation. It's not a competition. It totally is, Kushina said cheerfully. And you're both losing. It's not a victory until you've made the other person cry. Minato and Mikoto shared a glance. Remind me again why I'm letting her babysit my children. Mikoto asked drily. Why are you asking me? Minato asked, raising an eyebrow. I'm having one with her. A glance at Naruto made him rephrase his sentence. I have one with her. Naruto, don't listen to your mother. Minato doubted that Naruto had heard. The door swung open and revealed Kushina and the kids, all of them in various states of exasperation, disinterest, and outrage. Or, in Kushina's case, amusement. Sensei! Obito yelled before anyone had the chance to start talking. I totally mastered that exercise you left us last time. Kakashi is just jealous that I beat him for once. Kakashi left out a huff. As if he'll believe you. Who are you trying to fool? I'm telling the truth. Rin, tell him. Mikoto-san, Rin said, smiling politely as she ignored her teammates. It's nice to see you. And you've brought Sasuke. Who's that? Kakashi asked, his typical frown fixed on Naruto. Naruto's eyes widened comically. You're Kakashi-sensei. Minato winced, watching Kakashi's expression warp into incredulity. So much for breaking it to them gently. Naruto, maybe you should. Are you stupid? Obito said bluntly, their earlier argument all but forgotten. Obito, please, that's Kakashi-sensei? Naruto said, ignoring both of the team and throwing a glance at Minato. Seriously? Yes, but, I'm not a sensei, Kakashi interrupted. Why are you calling me that? Minato heaved a sigh. His kids, every single one of them, could be exhausting. Just listen, all of you. He turned to look at his team. Kakashi, Obito, Rin, there's somebody I'd like you to meet. Naruto squirmed, and Minato laid a calming hand on his shoulder. This is Naruto. A smile tugged at his lips at the name. He loved saying it out loud. He's our son. 3 equally incredulous stares swayed Naruto's way. Sensei, Kakashi deadpanned. He's our age. Kushina threw Minato a frown. You're doing it wrong. Let me. She turned towards his team. Brats, listen up. Minato screwed up a Horatian seal and flung himself into the future. This is top secret, so don't go blabbing about it. Minato sighed as the incredulous stares gained in intensity. They would be there for a while. Explaining everything to Team 7 was far more complicated than explaining it to a calm, attentive Mikoto had been. Even after they tentatively bought their story, it hadn't been easy to convince them that they, or rather, Kushina, weren't playing a prank on them. They kept derailing Minato's explanation with questions. It just activated on its own? Seals do that? Why didn't you say anything the first time around? What am I like in the future? As sensei? Tell us. Minato carefully but purposefully sidestepped that one. At least an hour had passed by the time all 3 of them had, somewhat, warmed up to their admittedly outrageous story. Mikoto's presence helped. While Kushina was always ready to have some fun on their expense, and Minato let himself get swept along from time to time, Mikoto seemed like a calm, rational person who was above that sort of thing. Obviously none of the 3 knew what Kushina and Mikoto had used to get up to, back in the day. Kakashi's seriously going to be a Jonin sensei when he's older? Obito said, his face almost as incredulous as Kakashi's. I'm not sure he will be, now that he knows, Minato said thoughtfully. I've changed other things before. Small things. I don't know what it'll be like the next time I go back. Kakashi's scowl had not wavered once for all the time it had taken Minato to explain. He looked like Naruto's presence insulted him on a personal level. If I'm supposed to become your Jonin sensei, does that mean you only just graduated? You're 12, and you've only graduated? Naruto crossed his arms and matched Kakashi's glare. Duh. Everybody's graduating with 12. Almost everybody. Kakashi opened his mouth to snap back but was interrupted by Rin's thoughtful hum. Is that what Konoha's like when there's peace? Minato smiled. Of course Rin would be the one to put together the pieces the quickest. That's right. We don't have to constantly send shinobi to the front lines anymore, so they can visit the academy for longer. But why? Kakashi was still frowning. That's so much wasted time. Nobody should take that long to finish the academy. Maybe everybody should, Mikoto said, and coming from her, it gave Kakashi a pause. Sensei, Obito said in a tone far too subdued for his usual cheer. You haven't told us much else about the future. Or about ourselves. Why's that? Trust Obito to be uncharacteristically observant exactly when Minato needed it the least. Although, he supposed, it was better being confronted than to dance around the topic until he found the courage himself. There's a reason you told us to stay in the village last time, Kakashi said, following up Obito's question. Isn't there? Minato sighed. Yes. Yes there is. He sent a help-seeking glance to Kushina. He didn't want to do this alone. At one point, probably fairly soon from now on, a mission of yours will go wrong. Terribly wrong. Kushina had taken the cue easily, and went on. You 3 are being sent to the front lines, and not all of you return whole. The outcome has changed once already, but not enough. I wish I knew more details, Minato said, but it's difficult to nail down when it changes every time I come back. As far as I can see, the only way to keep you safe, properly safe, is to keep you inside the village. Minato turned to look at his student. Even you, Kakashi? You were Naruto's Jonin instructor before, but that doesn't mean that can't change the next time I go back. I can't control what's happening. Not the way I'd like to. There was a moment of silence. Obito broke it first, hesitant and much unlike him. So if we don't stay in the village, we'll die? We might? Any of us could? It doesn't matter, Kakashi said, the only sign betraying his emotions being that he glared at the floor and not at them. How doesn't it matter? Obito said. They just said we have a duty to fulfill, Kakashi interrupted. We're shinobi for a reason. We've always known the risks. What does it change to be sure? Minato wanted to protest. He wanted to convince them of the opposite. Rin was quicker. How many other shinobi will have died, just like us? She asked quietly. How many of them during the war? Are you going to tell all of them not to fight? Konoha would lose, Kakashi said. We'd lose, and even more people would die. Obito's eyes were glued to the floor. We shouldn't be an exception because you're our teacher. A lump formed in Minato's throat. He wasn't sure whether it was from frustration or from pride. You knew this would happen, Mikoto said, giving Minato a strained smile. They're your team. Yeah, Minato said, smiling through the burning at the back of his throat. My team. He wondered how many of them he'd see the next time he went back. Guilt churned in Minato's gut as he finished packing Kushina's and his traveling bag. The seal had announced its intent to make the next jump soon. It had never been a question that it would transport 3, and not 2, passengers this time. Leaving Konoha behind in their absence had not been an easy decision, but it was one that hadn't allowed for many alternatives. Kushina refused to let herself be put on the sidelines, and Minato hadn't put much effort into changing her mind. Taking her along into the future meant he could introduce her to his older, battle-hardened team. Possibly, most likely, Minato would have to remind his wife to step back from her minor homicidal tendencies once she heard of some of the finer details of Naruto's childhood. He had so far forgotten to mention to her. Besides, they weren't leaving behind Konoha entirely. Will Mikoto be alright? Kushina asked, her brows knitting together in a frown. Minato would have loved to reassure her. I hope so, he said instead. There were not many people Minato would put his trust in as easily as Mikoto. She hadn't hesitated to agree to Minato's request, and was making some last-minute preparations before Minato, Kushina and Naruto were on their way. Far more complicated than getting Mikoto on their side, as if there was any other place for her to be, was explaining to Naruto what it meant to return to the future. What do you mean, things might have changed when we come back? He asked, a frown on his face. Exactly that, Minato said patiently, despite having explained it once already. We came back to the past knowing what the future used to look like. We might have changed something just by being here. Naruto paused, his frown deepening. But we've seen the future. We know what it's like. It's always been this way. How can it be any different than what it is? Actually, Kushina chimed in, it hasn't always been like this. Eh? What's that supposed to mean? I've already made several jumps, remember? Rin wasn't there the first time. She's alive now because of what I changed once I came back. And hopefully, she would be alive still when he returned. So anything could be different. Maybe not everything, Minato said. There wasn't a whole lot they had done, this time around. Most things are very unlikely to have changed. But in theory? Yes, I suppose. Like who I'm living with? Naruto asked. Or who's the Hokage? Oh. His expression brightened up in a wide, enthusiastic grin. Could you be Hokage again when we get back? Or Mom? Maybe we'll be living in a house when we get back. A really big one, and maybe Uchiha-san will be there and… Minato let him talk, although his smile grew increasingly strained. Naruto's rambling stomped over all the questions Minato had asked himself with Kushina and Mikoto whenever Naruto had not been able to overhear. Would Naruto's situation have improved at all, once they came back? Would Kushina and Minato be dead still? Would Mikoto? What about the Uchiha and Rin? Would someone else have died, someone they had not considered at all? What if? They all looked up as the door opened and Mikoto entered. She paused, then gave a single, curt nod. It's done. It worked? Kushina asked. Konoha received a distress signal from the front lines, Mikoto said with a perfectly straight face. The threat was unknown and time was short, so you two used the Haraishin to potentially save an entire unit of our shinobi. She paused. Such a shame that you couldn't spare the time to notify the council. They weren't pleased that they had to learn it from me. Kushina snorted. Did they try to press you for details? You know how they are, Mikoto said, which Minato took to mean they would rather face the combined force of their rival countries on their own than accept that their Hokage had entrusted the Uchiha matriarch with his plans and not them. Minato couldn't suppress a frown at the thought of their most recent excuse to have him leave the village. The first time had almost caused a mass panic after only 2 days. The second time had been riskier still. But a third Minato didn't doubt that they would have to give a proper explanation by the time they returned. Stop moping. Kushina shoved his shoulder. I can hear that you're overthinking it. I'm not, Minato said without conviction. He hadn't tried to talk Kushina out of joining him because he knew her too well to assume he'd have a chance to succeed. It did nothing to quell the feeling of irresponsibility and guilt that clawed in his chest at the thought of leaving Konoha without a Hokage, and without the next best thing, Kushina. If it meant that Kushina and he would figure out a way to avert even one of the many things that made the future horrible, it would be worth it. Wouldn't it? Besides, he trusted Mikoto. He trusted her with his life. He would find it in himself to trust her with his village for as long as it took him and Kushina to work out a solution. Minato paused, catching Mikoto's gaze with his own. Think about the offer I made you, alright? Mikoto's mouth tightened in a frown. She hesitated, then nodded. In normal circumstances, she would have never agreed to give Itachi to Jiraiya as an apprentice. She would have been determined to have him grow up and train surrounded by his clan, close to his family. The future wasn't kind enough to give them that choice. Be careful, Mikoto said, stepping forward to wrap Kushina in a tight hug. She shared a nod with Minato, then changed her mind and moved to hug him, too. Take care of each other. Mikoto's eyes dropped downwards, and her expression grew soft. And you, Naruto? She laid a hand on his shoulder briefly. Naruto gave her a somewhat hesitant smile. Yes, Uchiha-san. Mikoto's smile did not falter, but Minato saw the tension lining her shoulders. If everything turned out in a way that they'd planned, Naruto would grow up calling Mikoto an aunt, just like Sasuke and Itachi would call Kushina and Minato their aunt and uncle. They would create their perfect, happy ending. Minato and Kushina would make sure of it. Kushina had imagined many things upon arriving in the strange, unacceptable future her son had come from. She'd imagined marching through the village with a righteously burning fire in her chest, confronting each and every person that had done nothing to make Naruto's life less miserable after their death. She'd imagined cold determination flowing through her veins as she systematically weeded out each and every problem she would not tolerate in any future she would come to live in. Most of all, Kushina had expected to know exactly what to do the second they arrived. They'd certainly made enough plans, her and Minato and Mikoto. All of them seemed to evaporate with the very first breath she took upon their arrival. Her mind was blank. She felt like the breath had been knocked out of her as she looked over the village with an aimless, unfocused glance. Listening to stories didn't compare to seeing it all for herself. What had they planned to do first again? Mom? Are you alright? Naruto slipped out from Minato's grasp but didn't reach out to her. Kushina felt Minato's hand on her shoulder, firm and grounding. I'm fine, Kushina meant to say, and instead blurted out, we need to check up on Mikoto. Minato's expression grew strained. I told you what happened the last few times. He had. Kushina didn't need to hear that horrible story a second time. I know. And since you told Mikoto, she knew what was going to happen. There's no way she wouldn't prevent it. She would have tried, Minato offered. Kushina kind of wanted to punch him. Mikoto was one of the smartest people she knew. There was no way she would have let anything like the massacre happen, now that she'd known to prepare for it. Minato saw the stubborn crease between her eyes and sighed. Don't get your hopes up too much. Kushina didn't need to get her hopes up when she knew her childhood friend better than anyone else. Minato would see for himself, once they'd found her. Kushina leaped up and onto the nearest rooftop. Trusting Minato to either stay with Naruto or to bring him along, Kushina took the quickest route towards the Uchiha district that she knew of, uncaring who would spot them on their way. She wasn't planning on hiding from anyone. If anyone tried to stop her, well, Kushina held no reservations about working off some of her frustration, especially if somebody so graciously volunteered. Kushina didn't make it all the way to the Uchiha district. She didn't need to. She caught a glimpse of black hair and matching eyes and jumped, her eyes lingering on the white and red crest as she landed directly in front of the elderly woman, her mouth pulled into a grin. I knew it! Kushina did not know the woman, besides the fact that she was without a doubt an Uchiha. It did not stop her from pulling her into a tight, enthusiastic hug. I knew she'd do it. Kushina. Minato landed a few steps behind her, Naruto not far behind. Kushina ignored him. She realized that another Uchiha, a young, scrawny girl, stood beside them, watching wide eyes. Kushina pulled her into a hug too. The old woman sputtered in indignation. What do you think you're doing? Minato wrapped a firm, warm hand around Kushina's arm and pulled her back. She let it happen without losing the grin on her face. I am so sorry about that, Minato said, pushing Kushina behind him with a pained look. Please don't mind my wife. She's just excited. Are you an Uchiha? Naruto poked his head out from under Minato's arm. Like Sasuke? Of course she is, said Kushina, beaming. I told you Mikoto would do it. She wouldn't have let anything happen. Not while she was there to do something about it. She would have to ask her how she'd done it. Had it been enough to keep an extra eye on Itachi? To nudge him away from the path that had been laid out for him? Or had she ripped out the issue at its root and taken care of the Uchiha's isolation from the rest of the village? Better yet, perhaps Mikoto had found the culprit behind the conspiracy. Chances were high that their trap had snapped shut during their absence, and Mikoto had decided to take matters into her own hands. Let's find her quick, she said, giving Naruto a smirk. She can tell us everything. Kushina, Minato said, his voice an odd tone. Kushina ignored him in favor of the Uchiha woman. Where's Mikoto? She asked in a rush, her body brimming with the need to stop wasting time and to hunt down her friend. If it wasn't for the fact that she needed to be told where to find her, Kushina would have made a break for it already. Kushina took note of the woman's bemused frown. She held one arm stuck out to hold back her charge. Is this a joke? She said warily. Kushina's heart dropped into her stomach. Why would it be a joke? Minato asked. Kushina didn't think she could have made her voice work around the dryness in her throat. Come on, the woman muttered, yanking at the little girl's arm to get her moving. Kushina jumped in her way before she could leave. Wait. Please. It's not a joke. We're actually looking for Mikoto Uchiha. More quietly, Kushina added, what happened to her? The woman looked at them with a long, calculating glance. Then her shoulders dropped. You're him, aren't you? She said, not quite looking at Minato. The former Hokage, the one who's had the whole village astir for weeks. Next to her, the little girl gasped, I'm afraid so. Minato forced a horribly strained smile on his face. I'm not sure how much you know about me, but we are a bit out of the loop. The woman watched them with an expression veiled in reluctance. She jerked her head once. Come along then. She didn't spare them another glance, grabbed the little girl's hand and started walking. Kushina shared a look with Minato. With a lump in her throat and worry tugging at her stomach, they set off to follow the two Uchiha towards their home district. Later, Kushina wouldn't be able to tell at which point she'd stopped listening. She held onto the teacup she'd been offered without the intention to force any of it down her throat, and kept her eyes focused anywhere but the depressingly small number of Uchiha sat in a half-circle around them. Half a dozen Uchiha too old to fight, a few civilians who had never held a kunai before in their life, and an even smaller number of shinobi with battle injuries they would never recover from. There weren't any children in their round, but they were told that there were just under a dozen in the village. That was all. About 20 people, and none of them active shinobi, were left of Konoha's once proudest clan. Mikoto and her husband were just two names on the long list of shinobi who had given their life on that day. Something prickled at the edge of Kushina's awareness. She ignored it. She'd known that this was a possibility. She'd known that it was something she had to be prepared for. But actually sitting here, half listening to the tale of how an entire clan, families, shinobi, the entire police force, were reduced to a scattered group of grieving orphans and widows, Kushina pressed her eyes shut as if that could ever succeed in blocking out what had happened. Kushina, Minato muttered, rubbing a hand over her back. Go on. Take Naruto and find Kakashi and Rin. He nudged her until she rose to her feet shakily. I can take care of this. Go. Somewhat hysterical, Kushina thought that she could finally understand Minato's reaction upon arriving at the memorial after his very first time jump. She would hold on to Mikoto and refuse to let go for at least an hour once they returned. Kushina? It was the thought that they would return, that they would be seeing Mikoto again, that tore Kushina out of her paralysis. None of this was permanent, none of this had to happen a second time. They would make sure that it wouldn't. Kushina managed a shaky nod and laid a hand on Naruto's shoulder. Come on, Naruto. Kushina jumped up on the nearest rooftop and shook her head, trying to get rid of a persistent buzzing that had taken hold in it. Are you alright? Are you? Naruto frowned, the corner of his lip tugging downwards. You got all quiet and shaky in there. You're never quiet. Kushina paused. She'd been the one who'd freaked Naruto out, not everything they'd heard inside the district. She supposed that having grown up in a Konoha without Uchiha, listening to their extinction would have sounded like little more than a story to him. Kushina had known several of them dearly. I'm fine, she lied, and gave Naruto what she hoped was a reassuring smile. Come on. Let's take a look around this place, alright? And if anyone stopped them on the way, the chances were high that Kushina had a score to settle with them anyway. She certainly wouldn't complain if somebody gave her a reason to let out some steam. Minato let Kushina and Naruto go only reluctantly. As badly as he wanted to go with them, somebody needed to stay and listen. Somebody needed to hear the Uchiha story, needed to know what they had gone through in this new version of the future that somehow didn't seem an inkling better than the last. Please, he said, his voice gentle but insistent. The oppressive silence in the room felt suffocating. I need to know what happened. Anything you can tell me might help. You know nothing? The woman who brought him, Kiku, asked bluntly. I know that when I left Konoha 12 years in the past, the Uchiha clan was powerful and striving. My friend Mikoto was its matriarch. Various reactions flickered through the group. Some expressions tightened. Others twitched in irritation. One person caught Minato's glance and looked away just as quickly. I've already heard that she's no longer with us, Minato added quietly. What happened? The Uchiha were slaughtered. That's what happened, Kiku spat out. Her face was pinched with years' worth of pain and worry. Minato wondered if she was as old as she looked, or whether grief had carved lines on her face that exceeded her age. A single person murdered everybody but the few people you see right now. Please don't be Itachi. Please don't be Itachi. Do you know who did it? Minato asked, trying not to dread the answer. Yes and no. She paused, staring ahead with grim, bloodshot eyes. We've seen them. Most of us have. But we've never been able to capture or identify them. Another difference. Minato's brows knit in a frown. It didn't necessarily mean that Itachi was innocent. Just that he hadn't been recognized during the act. Mikoto had 2 children, he continued, his voice subdued. Are they? Muffled muttering broke out between several of the elders. They all fell silent with a pointed glare from Kiku. Alive, she said, her voice, if possible, even more exhausted than before. Under her breath, she added, for the most part. Minato wasn't sure what to make of it. The rising tension in the room forced him to pick his priorities, and he decided to focus on the assassin, rather than Itachi's fate. He'd gotten the answer to his biggest question. In this version of the future, Itachi had not been responsible for the Uchiha massacre. He hadn't killed the Uchiha. The knowledge didn't make Minato as happy as he'd hoped. The massacre had happened regardless, which meant that in the future before this one, the mystery person had been involved just the same. They'd succeeded in slaughtering every single Uchiha, then. Every one of them, except Sasuke. They'd failed this time. The most logical conclusion Minato could draw was one he much rather wanted to violently deny. Itachi hadn't caused the massacre in either future, but he'd been involved in the first. He hadn't decided to kill the Uchiha, but he had helped. He made the difference between a clan reduced to a fraction of its members and one wiped out entirely. Minato tried to force down the nauseous feeling in his gut by reminding himself that Itachi hadn't killed anyone this time. Minato hoped that he hadn't. Tell me more about the culprit, he said, forcing Itachi to the back of his mind. Tell me everything you know about them. Everything they knew didn't turn out to be much at all. Even after pooling their memories of the night together, begrudgingly, reluctant to relive what must have been the worst day of all their lives, Minato had only a rough idea about what sort of person had stood behind it. They wore a cloak, one of the Uchiha said, his voice barely loud enough to understand. A long black one. And they had a mask. There was something red on it, another said. No. Those were blood stains, yet another. They were silent. They didn't say a single word. They made no sound. None at all. It was like they weren't even a person. A ghost story, a disgruntled-looking elderly Uchiha said. That's what they are. People kept seeing them, afterwards. Watching us. Like they were waiting for something. There's nothing supernatural about them, Kiku spat, in a voice that suggested she'd had this argument many, many times. To Minato she said, even if we wanted to, we couldn't tell you anything accurate. They used genjutsu to warp our memories. Minato swallowed against the dry feeling in his throat. How so? I only remember flashes of that night. Fragments. And the feeling of dread in my bones when I even just think of that person. It's the same for me, a young woman whispered. Me too. I'm still having nightmares. They were gone by the time A&B showed up. Maybe they didn't feel like taking on the rest of the village, as well. Maybe they just got bored. The man's eyes sparked cynically. They went for the strongest of us first. A woman, older than all the others, had her eyes fixed on the ground. She made no attempt to hide the grief in either her expression or her voice. We are all that are left. Nobody else spoke. The silence around them was heavy and thick, and Minato felt like he was reliving memories of suffering and death despite not having been present himself. Kiku broke the silence with a whisper. There's nothing more for you to find out. Please go. Minato easily agreed. He'd torn open enough wounds for one day. He hoped Kushina and Naruto were having an easier time. The buzzing in her head was growing loud enough to get irritating. Kushina shook her head as if she was shooing off an annoying fly. She had more important things to worry about. Like finding someone, anyone, she knew who had survived this twisted parody of Konoha they'd landed in. Where are we going? Naruto asked, keeping up with Kushina's pace beside her. What Minato said. Kushina rubbed at her temples. To find his team. Or anyone else who can tell us something. At one point they had left the rooftops and taken to walk through the village. In Kushina's peripheral vision, something shattered on the ground as whoever was carrying it froze in their tracks at spotting her. The noise wasn't letting up. Do you know where to find them? Mom? Kushina grumbled under her breath and squeezed her eyes shut. The buzz grew into an insistent pounding inside her head. At the same time, her Jinchuriki seal started to itch. Kushina froze in her tracks. What did the bastard fox have to do with anything? Mom? Are you alright? Now that Kushina concentrated, the pounding subsided. The buzzing cleared and revealed something else, something that sounded almost like a voice, like, Aina? Kushina, she knew that voice. The hair at the back of her neck stood up. Kushina whirled around to find Kushina-san. Rin landed in front of them breathlessly. Her eyes flickered up and down as if she expected Kushina to disappear and tried taking in as much as she could in the meantime. It's you, Rin said, that same air of disbelief and fragile hope hovering around her voice. Minato brought you with him? Kushina-san. Another figure landed beside her, one eye widened and the other one covered. Kushina's heart clenched at the sight of it. According to Minato, Kakashi had kept his eye on the version before this one. Did this mean they had actually taken a step back trying to change the future? Her crestfallen expression did not go by unnoticed. Kakashi fidgeted under her gaze, seemingly weighing his options of making a swift retreat. Kushina-san? Is something wrong? Kushina desperately tried to grasp for the right words. Or any. We saw the Uchiha. Her voice failed her, and Kushina gave into the urge to leap forwards and pull Rin and Kakashi into a hug. Both of them went stiff under her touch, but they didn't struggle. Kakashi was the first to speak, once she let go. I know this must be difficult. It was for us, back when it happened. That's not it. Rin's brows were knit in concern. Minato would have told you. You're shocked, so clearly he didn't. She paused. Did something change? Again, change? Kakashi asked. What do you mean, change? Yes. Kushina swallowed past the dryness in her throat. Yes, it changed. It was worse before. Rin stiffened. The look in her eyes grew hard and unfeeling. How could it have been worse? It was. Kushina's eyes lowered to the ground as she remembered the haunted look in Minato's eyes. Shamefully, she was glad for not having gone to that first future herself. This version was bad enough. Next to her, Naruto started to grow restless. Rin blinked as if she'd only just noticed him. Seeing as she just reunited with a previously dead Kushina, Kushina found it in herself to forgive her for it. Naruto! You're alright. Rin's voice was soft with relief and she reached out to briefly touch Naruto's shoulder. Naruto squirmed, unsure what to do in response to the touch. Hello, Rin-san? Rin offered a small, hesitant smile. We didn't know what to do when Jiraiya-san told us you'd gone with Minato. I'm glad you're alright. Her smile widened, and that you got to meet your mother. Finally, Naruto's mouth pulled into a genuine smile. It dimmed quickly as his eyes focused on something standing further behind them. On someone. Sensei? Kakashi stared at him without speaking, his visible eye wide with bemusement. When he finally got his voice to work, he only said, Naruto. Kushina wasn't in the mood for any more surprises. Why are you being weird? Yeah. Naruto frowned. What's wrong? Kakashi shook his head, the frown still plastered on his face. It feels odd. Kakashi narrowed his eye as if seeing Naruto for the first time, as if he wanted to take in every detail he had so far missed. I remember meeting you when I was a child, he said slowly. But why did I didn't? Kushina's eyes widened. What else do you remember? Nothing, Kakashi burst out, his voice rising in volume. I've known him since I was a teenager. Why don't I have any other memories of him until a few weeks ago? Rin let out a groan. This happened before, she muttered, rubbing her temples as if fighting off a headache. This feeling, I remember it. What do you mean? Kakashi frowned. What feeling? Rin stole a glance at Naruto. Kushina couldn't decipher it in time. Look, Kakashi. She hesitated. Last time Minato came here, you hadn't introduced yourself to Naruto. He didn't know you. At all. Kushina attempted to swallow down the bitterness the sentence caused. She didn't succeed. I didn't even know Dad had a genin team until he told me himself, Naruto muttered. Kakashi's eye narrowed in disbelief. What? No, that doesn't make any. His eye closed with a groan. I don't understand. Me neither. Not completely, Rin admitted. Kakashi sent a helpless glance towards Kushina. If it was different before, that means it has changed. Minato changed it. Right, so why do I remember these? Why do my memories contradict each other? How can I forget some of what used to be, but not everything? Minato and Kushina had asked themselves the very same questions. They'd done their best to figure out an explanation. Or at least a theory. I don't think you're forgetting those things so much as that you're suppressing them, she said eventually. The future isn't rewriting itself. We think that the two versions, what it was like before, and what we changed, are merging. Your mind glosses over the details that make no sense anymore. It's like she struggled to decide how to phrase the sentence. It's like reality is trying to smooth over the differences. Hence Rin forgetting her own death, but reliving it in her nightmares. Hence Kakashi remembering Naruto from when he was a kid, despite not having known him at that age before. It's like remembering something from your childhood, Kushina went on, but your memory is crap, so you don't remember most of it. Your mind wants to have the full picture. It likes when everything makes sense, so it's filling in the blanks in between the things you do remember. Except it's filling them in badly. Kakashi paled. How do I know which memory is the original and which has changed? Kushina felt her expression grow strained. I don't think there is a way. She didn't particularly want to imagine what it would feel like, finding out about someone else meddling with time and changing her future as they saw it fit. In a way, Kushina was lucky. She was the one to make the changes, she and Minato, so from her point of view, she was making the best choices she could possibly make. But standing on the sidelines, being forced to let other people decide about her fate? About the fate of all of Konoha, of her friends, her family? Kushina would never be able to accept it. Kushina's hand rose to absent-mindedly scratch an itch on her belly before freezing halfway to her Jinchuriki seal, realizing what she was doing. She couldn't believe she'd forgotten. Kushina-san? Kakashi asked, noting her rigid posture immediately. She decided she would talk to Minato before worrying anybody else. Yeah. She forced her hand to keep still and twisted her mouth into a smile. All good. I mean, besides the obvious. And also the minor fact that the time hopping might have permanently messed with her Jinchuriki seal. Oh joy, if you say so. Kakashi didn't sound convinced. I do say so. Let's go and see if Minato's done yet, Kushina said, brusquely changing the topic despite feeling far from ready to return to the depressing sight of the few remaining members of the Uchiha clan. You're not fine. Kushina did a full-body flinch. Immediately afterwards, Rin froze. Kushina, the voice fell silent. Rin's voice did. Rin, whose mouth most definitely hadn't moved. Rin, who'd somehow spoken directly into Kushina's mind. Rin, who now looked like she was seconds away from bolting. What was that? I'm sorry. Rin took a step back, her eyes wide. Kushina debated grabbing her arm to prevent her from making a run for it. It's incredibly intuitive. I didn't mean to. Kushina made an effort to make herself look calmer. Didn't mean to do what? What is? She made a vague hand gesture. This. Rin didn't answer. Kushina debated asking Kakashi, but one look at his puzzled glance made her give up on that plan. Instead, Kushina concentrated. She reached out to the feeling she'd felt before, that buzzing, pounding feeling inside of her head, a weight in her mind that told her there was more, something trying to reach her. Rather than trying to ignore it, Kushina followed through. She felt a bond guiding her, pulling her mind towards one direction, pulling her through a sort of tunnel. Pulling her towards Rin. Connecting. Kushina did the one thing she could think of doing. She reached out. What is this? She wasn't talking through her mouth. Kushina knew, because she didn't feel it moving. A low, displeased growl vibrated somewhere behind her belly button. Kushina was yanked back as her concentration shattered, and she reemerged next to Rin and Kakashi, a hand flying down to clutch at her stomach. The sensation was already gone. Your seal's fine, Rin said quietly. Kushina didn't like the look in her eyes. How did you know? She whispered, keeping her hand exactly where it was. Naruto latched onto her other arm. Kushina didn't have the heart to nudge him away. Rin didn't answer immediately. Kakashi no longer looked confused by what was going on, and avoided Kushina's gaze. Rin, Kushina said, her voice sharp. How did you know? I know, Rin said simply, her hand pausing on its way to gripping the hem of her shirt. Slowly, inch by inch as if she was fighting against a physical resistance, Rin pulled it up. By the time her hand came to a halt, Kushina was staring. Her eyes were fixed on the patch of skin that Rin had revealed, as well as the ink decorating it. Kushina's chest hollowed out as the realization left her breathless. Kushina-san, you're a Jinchuriki, Kushina said. Her own seal prickled on her skin, and she couldn't shake the thought that the fox was laughing at her. Somebody started following him after Minato exited the Uchiha compound. If his instincts hadn't been as good as they were, he might have written the foreboding feeling off as the aftereffects of the ghost story he had heard from the survivors of Mikoto's clan. He knew better than to let rumors and stories impact his efficiency as a shinobi, and took the hunch as seriously as he would have a kunai aimed at his turn back. He needn't have bothered. Whoever it was, they did not care about keeping themselves hidden. You told the truth, the stranger said. Going by their voice, Minato suspected a man, his voice quiet and muffled through an ANBU mask. In contrast to most ANBU Minato knew, he wore long sleeves that covered his tattoo. Minato weighed his options and decided to stay. For now. The truth about what? He wondered if this was yet another shinobi sent to keep an eye on him. And why, if that was the case, he had decided to reveal himself so easily. The ANBU shifted from foot to foot and fidgeted with his hands. No, not truth, he mumbled, his voice almost too quiet to hear. Not all. Lie. Excuse. Hurts. Minato deliberately didn't let his confusion show. He wasn't sure if the ANBU, rather the stranger, as Minato's suspicion grew that he was no ANBU at all, was talking to himself or simply struggling to express himself. Who are you? The stranger's posture relaxed but his voice remained agitated. Not him. Okay, Minato said carefully. Not him, the stranger repeated more urgently. Not never. Never him. Okay, Minato agreed, more firmly this time. He paused, taking the time to take in his counterpart more thoroughly. None of his social cues made any sense. He wore an ANBU mask, but held none of the confidence or subtlety that an ANBU operative carried. He made no effort to hide his body language, or else did not know how. Even with his body language on full display, Minato could read nothing from him. Everything the stranger did felt disjointed and odd. His feet stood apart confidently while his upper body was hunched over. His voice showed agitation when his hands rested calmly at his sides. His chakra had a dampened, fickle feeling to it, as though he didn't have good control over it. Despite his unpredictability, Minato didn't sense danger coming from the stranger. Before Minato had the chance to speak, the stranger's body language changed yet again. Tension bled out of his shoulders and left him in a calm, almost lazy posture. It didn't fit his voice, nor the tone that came with it. You're not supposed to be. I'm not here. Minato latched onto the statement before the stranger could get distracted again. Why not here? Don't want to. Minato blinked at the childish answer. What don't you want? The stranger hunched in on himself, his voice taking on an agitated quality. No. Can't. Won't. He tugged at his hair as though he wanted to comb out knots with his hand. His fingers brushed against the rim of his mask and he let his hand drop, clenching it into a fist. I won't. Changing tactics, Minato matched his own demeanor to the one of the stranger. He took on a softer, kinder tone. Almost as though talking to a child. You don't have to do anything, he said, his voice careful and soothing. Can you tell me who you are? The stranger went still. There are no orders. Minato stopped himself from flinching. The body language that had him so confused was gone. There was no stutter. Minato was no longer able to estimate how dangerous he was. No orders, Minato repeated, rethinking his decision of not having signaled for backup. You weren't ordered to be here? The stranger didn't move out of his confident stance. His voice came as a hoarse whisper. Soon. Will be. Soon. The stranger's head jerked around. Despite knowing better, Minato followed his gaze. When he turned back, the stranger had moved closer. Meet. Outside village. Answers. Minato hesitated. He subconsciously reached for a Horatian seal. You want me to? Answers, the stranger repeated, looked at something past Minato and disappeared in a blur. Wait, Minato tried, too late. When Minato turned and saw Kushina, he didn't know whether to be relieved or disappointed. Kushina, he greeted, trying not to let his frustration show. The feeling vanished as soon as he realized her solemn expression. What's wrong? She hesitated, which was enough to make alarm bells go off in Minato's head. I'll tell you when we're home. It's about Rin. Upon seeing his alarmed expression, she added, she's fine. Just there's something you need to know. Kushina jerked her head in the direction the stranger had disappeared to. Who was that? Their chakra was all over the place. I don't know, Minato admitted, fighting the belated urge to run after the stranger. He said to meet him outside of Konoha. He promised me answers. I think. Meet him? When? Kushina's frown deepened, following his gaze. I don't know, Minato said, feeling like a broken record. He didn't say. He just told me to meet him. Well, you're obviously not going to do that. Minato didn't answer. You're kidding. He wanted to tell me something, Minato said, feeling defensive. It just seemed like he didn't know how. Or like he thought he wasn't allowed to, because that doesn't sound shady at all. Kushina opened her mouth to say more, but sighed. Let's talk about this later. When she looked up, her eyes were heavy. Who knows when your mystery guy will be back? If it's really important, he'll come look for you. Minato didn't want to let the matter rest that easily. He wanted to find out more, but he didn't like the look in Kushina's eyes. Let's go home, he decided, pushing the stranger to the back of his mind. Kushina and Minato lay curled up on the tiny couch in Naruto's apartment, empty cups of ramen next to them and Minato's hands in Kushina's hair, combing through it lazily. She didn't peek, but she was fairly certain she could feel the beginning of a braid coming together. Rin and Kakashi had left to keep the Hokage up to date, while Naruto was on his way to look for his teammates. The two of them had taken the opportunity to let themselves breathe and digest all the new information they'd learned. You don't know if she was like this from the start, do you? Kushina asked, thinking of Rin. Minato paused. He tugged a strand of her hair free from her ear and pulled it back. He was definitely making a braid. No. I'm sorry, it didn't occur to me. She might not have thought to tell me either, with everything else that's been going on. There was no way for them to find out whether Rin had been a Jinchuriki the last time Minato had come back or whether it was a new development. Rin might not have told him, Minato hadn't thought to ask, and Rin wouldn't remember whether it had changed. Now, we'll have to ask her for details of how it happened, Minato said. Otherwise we won't know what we need to change. Kushina's brow twitched. Why do we need to change it? There's nothing wrong with her. There's nothing wrong with her being a Jinchuriki, Minato agreed, his hands faltering momentarily. It is wrong that she didn't have a choice in becoming one. She was kidnapped and sealed by force, Kushina. Nobody deserves that. Kushina didn't answer. The thought of having another Jinchuriki in Konoha, other than her son, who would one day take over hosting Kurama from her, was a temptation she had never really considered before. She liked the thought of having someone to relate to. She liked the thought of not being alone with her burden. But was she selfish enough to condemn Rin to that fate when there was a way to prevent it? Kushina squirmed in discomfort when it took her longer to come up with an answer than it probably should have. There was a knock on the window, and before either of them could do more than look over, Rin had slipped through. You shouldn't talk about people behind their back, she said quietly. I'm sorry, Minato easily amended. We were just collecting our thoughts. We weren't going to make any decisions without you. Good. Rin sat down in front of the couch, rubbing the hem of her shirt. I've had enough of that to last me a lifetime. Kushina craned her neck to share a glance with Minato. His brows were knit in an unhappy frown. We might be able to prevent it from happening, he said, his voice cautious. If that's something you want. It can't have been easy, Kushina forced herself to say. Especially not with me, with us, gone. Konoha would have lost a valuable player in Kushina, so the pressure for Rin to take her place would have been massive. Kushina had grown up with the Ninetales since she was a child. Rin had been a teenager. She would have had a far more difficult time learning to control her powers. Had there been anybody to teach her? Or had she had to learn everything by herself? You might not have to go through all of that, she added, feeling less reluctant about the offer. If there was a chance to make Rin's life easier for her, what kind of person would Kushina be to deny her? I already did, Rin said, still not meeting their eyes. She hesitated. I don't want you to change it. Are you sure? Minato asked, his voice gentle but insistent. Your life might look completely differently. Exactly. Kushina wasn't certain how easily they'd be able to change such a huge aspect of her life, anyway. Even if they managed it, would Rin be reminded of the experience in her nightmares for the rest of her life? Would she ever be able to forget the feeling of carrying a demon inside her? Would she forget the pain it had caused her? Or the burden it had placed on her shoulders? Rin chewed her lip, picking at her shoulder where her ANBU symbol was tattooed. Maybe this is for the best. It's better now that you two are back. Before either of them could remind her that their presence was temporary, she added, now that I know Naruto, maybe I can help him. Make it a bit easier for him. Rin had just given her another reason to feel selfishly glad for her burden. Even if Kushina wasn't there for him, Naruto would have another Jinchuriki to guide him. The grave atmosphere was broken by someone knocking on the front door. Rin pushed herself to her feet to open it. "Oh, hello, Rin-sensei," a girl with bright pink hair said. "I was looking for Kakashi-sensei." "Is he?" Her voice trailed off as she caught sight of Kushina and Minato. Her eyes widened. "He's not here." Rin pretended as though the girl wasn't blatantly staring at the other two occupants of the room. "You'll have to look elsewhere." The girl didn't move. And kept staring. Just when Kushina felt the urge to drop an unflattering comment, she stuttered, "Rin-sensei. Is that are those? Why is she calling you sensei?" Kushina interrupted, raising an eyebrow at Rin, considering how utterly opposed she'd been to the idea. According to Minato, Kushina found this detail somewhat puzzling. Kushina had to squash the urge to rub her eyes in disbelief as Rin's cheeks turned pink. "This is Sakura." She was assigned the same genin team as Naruto and Sasuke. While confirming her suspicions, Rin had not actually answered Kushina's question. "And?" Minato arched a brow. "How does that translate to her calling you sensei?" "Because she is." Sakura piped up, an eagerness in her voice that suggested she was ridiculously pleased to be able to answer their questions. "Kind of. She's actually Sasuke's instructor. But we train together a lot, so I get to call her sensei too." The color of Rin's face deepened as both Minato and Kushina turned to look at her. "It's not like that. I'm not actually, I mean," she sighed, caving to the urge to bury her face in her hands. Kushina decided to have mercy and kept her overly excited grin at bay. "I want to hear all the details." Kakashi and Rin, both Jonin instructors. "Oh, I can't wait to see what you taught these two. Have you been sharing the responsibility?" Minato asked, sporting a smile himself. He made no secret out of his own joy at the revelation. Rin raised her head, her cheeks still flushed a soft pink. Her expression took on a more serious note. "You took Naruto with you." Kakashi couldn't keep his genin team once it was incomplete. Kushina's grin slid off her face. "Kakashi lost his team?" Rin opened her mouth as though her first impulse was to reassure her. She paused. "Yes. This is the alternative we found so he could keep teaching them." Kushina shared a dismayed look with Minato. Bringing Naruto with him had been an accident, but she could still see guilt reflected in his eyes. His throat wobbled as though he had trouble swallowing past it. "So," he said, his voice oddly subdued, "you took Sakura and Sasuke as your apprentices?" "They would have gone back to the academy, otherwise," Rin said, confirming Minato's words indirectly. "It's alright." Sakura's voice had lost some of its thrill. "It all worked out in the end, didn't it? Kakashi-sensei's a great teacher. I know that Sasuke's happy with Rin-sensei too." Kushina's brows rose at their choice in students, and she made a mental note to ask about it, later. She thought that Kakashi would have been the first choice to train a clan member like Sasuke, especially considering that in this version of the future he had kept the Sharingan. "Besides, we're training together so often that we might as well be a full team," Sakura added. "If Naruto's back and Rin-sensei and Kakashi-sensei teach all three of us, hardly anything will have changed." Rin looked ready to protest this conclusion. That's not how it." "That sounds like a wonderful plan," Minato agreed, his smile covering up his prior dismay. "Kushina and I would be happy to join and give some pointers ourselves, as long as we're here." Sakura's face lit up. Kushina was certain that if she was slightly more of a civilian than a shinobi, she would have fainted on the spot. "Will you tell us stories about you? You're famous, both of you." Kushina felt a pleased smirk settle on her lips. "Oh, I've got tons of stories. I'm sure the history books haven't got even half of them." Going by Minato's wary expression, he knew exactly which kind of stories Kushina was talking about. Oh well, he would just have to live with the fact that the longer Kushina spent in the future, the less people would remember him as their wondrous, awe-inspiring yellow flash. How they had ever managed to get that wildly inaccurate image of him in the first place, Kushina would never know. "By the way, Rin," Minato said, changing the topic before Kushina could give Sakura a first taste. "That coward. Did you see Naruto on your way here? Or you, Sakura?" Sakura shook her head as Rin said, "He wanted to look for his team, right? Sakura's here, so chances are he's with Sasuke." Kushina shared a glance with Minato. They had yet to talk to either of Mikoto's sons. "Let's see if we can find them," Minato decided, standing up from his seat on the couch. Kushina supposed that her hair would have to wait. She bundled up the half-braided mess and tied a hair band around it without bothering to untangle it first. "All right, let's do this," she said, flashing Sakura a grin that almost made her swoon. "Lead the way, you two. It's about time to reunite your team." They must have made quite the picture, marching through Konoha without sparing their surroundings so much as a glance. Rin and Sakura had taken the lead, although Sakura kept throwing glances behind her as if assuring herself that Kushina and Minato were still following along. As adorable as her starstruck hero worship was, if she didn't get over it in the foreseeable future, Kushina would have to help her along. Only a short amount of time spent with Minato was enough to realize just what a dork he was, so she was carefully optimistic that she wouldn't have to resort to drastic measures. They heard the argument before they saw it. Naruto stood to the side, silent for once, while Sasuke exchanged heated words with no other than Jiraiya. He'd barely changed since Kushina had seen him last. Just saying, Jiraiya said, pinning Sasuke with a frown, do you really want this to continue like it has? I'm trying to help you move past this, so if you just let me, I already have. Just not in the way everybody seems to want me to. Sasuke clenched his hands at his sides. His face was scrunched up in a glare. I don't need you to try and meddle with my life. I'm not trying to make your decisions for you. A trace of frustration entered Jiraiya's voice. If you just gave him a chance. He's had his chance, Sasuke interrupted. He's the one who decided not to take it. Just look at the Uchiha district to see where it's taken us. I think you're giving your brother too much credit. I hardly think he could have made a difference all on his own. He could have tried. With those words Sasuke turned, an oddly dispassionate expression on his face. He paused as he caught sight of Kushina and the others. I'm not done talking, Sasuke, Jiraiya said, but was interrupted by a quiet voice. Leave him be. You should not have tried to force him. Minato sucked in a sharp breath. Kushina hadn't noticed Itachi up until this point either. He stood a few steps behind Jiraiya, partially covered by his frame, not as though he was trying to hide, but as though he was moments away from drifting away from the conversation. I don't get it. A frown marred Naruto's face. Didn't you want to kill your brother? Minato let out a sigh. Kushina herself was suppressing the urge to bury her face in her hands. It would appear that their son had inherited her own sense of tact. Sasuke gave Naruto an odd look. Why would I want that? He's not worth my attention. His voice gained an edge. He's not worth anything. He abandoned us when we needed him. Sasuke, Jiraiya snapped. I've heard enough. I don't care what you say. Sasuke glowered at Jiraiya. You won't change my mind. With that Sasuke stalked away, leaving behind a troubled-looking Naruto, a frustrated Jiraiya, and Itachi, who hadn't so much as batted an eyelash at his brother's accusations. There was a beat of silence before Jiraiya sighed. Itachi, look, it is all right. I do not mind. Itachi gave Jiraiya a smile. Thank you for trying, but I have already told you that there is no need. Both Itachi's words and his facial expression suggested that he wasn't bothered by what had happened. However, his smile looked empty. What was that about? Minato asked, following Sasuke's retreating back with his eyes. Jiraiya didn't startle. Naruto had already made their return to the future known, so he was not surprised to see them. He did, however, pause as his eyes found Kushina. Welcome back. You brought Kushina. You didn't seriously expect me to stay behind, did you? Kushina's cheerful tone fell flat in the subdued atmosphere Jiraiya and Sasuke's argument had left behind. What did Sasuke mean? Minato asked, pressing for answers. Jiraiya's expression was conflicted. It's complicated. There's something you should know before. Jiraiya trailed off as Itachi met his gaze. He sighed. I guess it's not really my story to tell. Sasuke blames me for what happened to our clan, Itachi admitted quietly. Kushina had thought as much from Sasuke's accusations. Does he have a reason to? Minato asked. Itachi paused as he picked up on Minato's neutral expression. Kushina wished he wasn't being so obvious about it. Considering Itachi had been a murderer in the last version of the future, she didn't blame him. I was unable to aid our clan because I was on a trip with Jiraiya-sensei. Jiraiya sighed. We were on a lot of training trips around that time. We were away from Konoha a lot. Just like you asked us to, went on said as he spared a glance at Minato. My brother does not forgive me for not being there when our clan needed me. Kushina doubted that a single incident, even as major as this, was enough to sway Sasuke's opinion against his brother to such a degree. The seed of his negative feelings must have been planted prior to it. Perhaps he begrudged Itachi for the time he spent away even before the massacre? Jiraiya frowned at Minato. Rather than the guilty expression one might have expected, Minato's brows were creased in thoughtfulness. Kushina understood. They'd been confronted with plenty of grief and regret since traveling through time. Minato even more so than her, seeing as it wasn't his first trip. They'd have plenty of it still to come, but not in this case. Not when they were finally collecting enough clues to begin figuring out this jigsaw puzzle of a future. If you want to interrogate my student, just say it outright, Jiraiya said, a frosty quality to his voice that startled Minato out of his musings. Surprise flickered over Minato's face before he managed to suppress it. That wasn't what I was trying to do. He hesitated. How much do you remember about my last visit? About Konoha during that time? Only flashes, Jiraiya replied curtly. But I've been training Itachi for years. It doesn't matter what kind of person you knew him as then, because he isn't that person now. I still need to figure out what happened to him, last time. Minato kept his voice quiet. I need to puzzle out what changed, and why. So that it isn't going to happen again. Jiraiya paled, his expression going grim as he realized that was a very real possibility. Losing the edge in his voice, he said, ask what you want. I'll answer what I can, but it isn't much. I cannot recall much of it either. Itachi admitted. I am afraid I will not be much help. Any piece of information will help, Minato said, his tone towards Itachi considerably softer than before. Kushina realized that another person had left. Where'd Rin go? She asked, somewhat impressed that she hadn't noticed her leaving. Jiraiya cast a brief glance around but didn't look as though he expected to see her. I think I know where she's gone. Rin found Sasuke sitting on her porch and stroking Eri's head. Eri didn't purr, she never did, but curled up next to his leg and nestled her head against Sasuke's knee. Seeing as she kept coming back only because Sasuke insisted on feeding her, Rin found it somewhat ironic that Eri was still considered Rin's cat. She barely even tolerated Rin. Her legs worse, Sasuke said without looking up. I think she got into another fight. She should know better by now. Rin sunk onto the porch next to Sasuke by folding her legs underneath her. She reached out with a green glow around her hands, frowning as Eri soundlessly bared her teeth. She's going to help you, Sasuke muttered, making her settle down with brief, gentle strokes of her fur. Rin's second attempt was tolerated, if not particularly appreciated. Rin worked in silence as either of the two attempted to speak. She didn't mind. Neither did Sasuke. She paused in her work after the bulk of the injury was healed and she was certain that nothing complicated had been damaged. She scooted over and gave Sasuke a nod. Sasuke hesitated but didn't protest. He furrowed his brows and managed to manifest the same aura of healing chakra after a few seconds of deep concentration. Rin watched as he proceeded to heal the superficial part of the injury himself. Something small wriggled in her chest, a spark of emotion Rin tentatively identified as pride. Well done, she said once Sasuke had lowered his hands and would no longer be distracted by her words. Kakashi hadn't agreed with her at first. He'd insisted that Sakura's chakra control made her a better candidate to become a medic than Sasuke. While he wasn't wrong, Rin had seen Sakura's shortcomings. She was lacking in most of the basics, everything other than being book smart, and Kakashi was better suited to help her overcome them quickly. Sasuke meanwhile needed focus. His anger made him frustrated and reckless. Channeling that anger into something precise, something complicated like healing helped. Jiraiya thinks he's doing what's best for you, Rin told him. But he's biased. Sasuke scowled while petting the cat. He shouldn't be trying to make decisions about my life. He hesitated. What do you think I should do? Rin couldn't think of an answer at first. She wasn't used to being someone who gave other people advice. She wasn't used to being looked up to and respected. The only reason she didn't send Sasuke to Kakashi with these sorts of questions was because she knew he was just as hopeless as she was. I think you shouldn't allow anyone to pressure you, she settled on eventually. You don't want to make up with your brother. That's fine, Sasuke chewed on his lip. Everybody says I shouldn't hold grudges. There's so few of us left. They say I can't afford to split us up even further. It isn't your job to hold your clan together. Not reconciling with your brother will not break the rest of them apart. Sasuke's eyes were pinned on the ground. He neither agreed nor disagreed. Rin fought to keep a scowl off of her face. She'd always had trouble expressing herself. She wasn't the right person for this job. Your clan members want you to be happy, she started, her voice slow and hesitant. They want you to make up with your brother because they believe you will be happier when you're united. They want to help you, I know that, but you know what makes you happy better than them. It is your choice, not theirs. Rin hesitated. Not Jiraiya's choice, either. Or your brother's. It feels like Itachi's the only one who hasn't tried to make me forgive him, Sasuke muttered. They sat in silence, absent-mindedly petting the cat between them. They stayed that way until Eri decided she'd gotten her fill of attention for the day and stalked away, hopefully not about to pick another fight immediately after getting her leg healed. Let's go back, Rin decided, pushing herself to her feet. They'll be waiting. Sasuke pursed his lips. He neither spoke nor moved from his spot on the porch. Your brother won't have stayed, Rin assured him. He was only there because of Jiraiya. Sasuke hesitated. He climbed to his feet next to Rin. Fine. Sasuke's back. Naruto followed Sakura's thrilled exclamation and turned in time to see her skip towards Sasuke with a beam. Sasuke didn't react, but he didn't move away from Sakura either. Naruto wondered if the only reason he hadn't made a run for it yet was because the old guy and Sasuke's brother were no longer there. Sasuke looked reluctant to be there, and considering the argument they'd had earlier, Naruto doubted Sasuke would voluntarily spend more time with either of the two. Naruto didn't really get it. The whole time traveling thing was confusing even without people showing up to be part of his life he hadn't known before. There were his parents, his amazing, wonderful parents who hadn't left him because they didn't want him but because they hadn't had a choice. There was the old guy, Jiraiya, who was apparently his godfather and staying in Konoha more often now. Perhaps even permanently? Then there were Rin and Kakashi. Naruto wasn't entirely sure which of them was going to be teaching him from now on. He thought it would be Kakashi, but then he'd gone back in time with his parents, and everything had changed yet again. He didn't even know if he was still part of a team. Naruto remembered then that he had people to ask these questions now. Hey, Dad, he said, stepping closer to his father and getting a thrill out of saying the word Dad. If Kakashi is teaching Sakura and Rin is teaching Sasuke, who's gonna be my teacher? Well, his father started, now that your team is complete, I expect you'll be trained together. Maybe Rin and Kakashi will share the responsibility. Naruto's expression lit up. He'd hate to have to choose between the two. They were both super amazing ninja, so being taught by not one of them but both was clearly the best possible solution. Hey, Sakura! Naruto called, bouncing on his feet. So what's Kakashi-sensei like as a... He trailed off when he realized that Sakura was already talking. Means well, but he doesn't know what he's talking about. Sasuke's arms were crossed, but he didn't try to move away from Sakura. Nor did he tell her to stop talking. Jiraiya-san has known your brother for years, Sakura went on. It's only natural he'd want to protect him. I know, Sasuke muttered, his brows furrowed. You don't need to tell me that. I'm just saying, he doesn't actually want you to. I don't want to talk about this anymore. I just... Sakura trailed off. Okay. Sorry for bringing it up. Naruto watched the interaction with a mixture of puzzlement and apprehension. This, like so many other things he'd known, had changed as well. The Sakura he knew wouldn't have talked to Sasuke without blushing or squealing. She definitely wouldn't have tried telling him he was wrong about something, and the Sasuke he knew wouldn't have listened to Sakura in the first place. At the very least he wouldn't have responded. Naruto realized then that Sasuke and Sakura had several weeks of training together that Naruto had missed out on. Naruto clamped his mouth shut and tried not to let it show on his face what he was thinking. Did he even have a place in the team? Let's talk about something else, Sakura muttered, although she didn't sound happy at the prospect. Her eyes fell on Naruto and she paused, biting her lip. Naruto tried not to squirm under her gaze. So, Naruto. Did somebody teach you while you were gone? Kind of? Mom and Dad both showed me some stuff. Not as much as he'd like, seeing as there were so many other things they'd had to do. Really? Sakura's eyes lit up. That's so cool, what did they show you? Was it chakra exercises? Rin-sensei taught us a couple just recently. Naruto wasn't sure how to respond to Sakura's sudden enthusiasm. Why yeah? Yeah, something like that. How about we swap? You show us what you learned, and we show you what we did. We can practice together. All of his prior thoughts vanished as excitement flooded his chest. Duh. You need to show me everything I missed. I'll catch up in no time, you'll see. There was no way he'd fall behind his two teammates, no matter their head start. Naruto would just have to train harder and longer than the both of them, and soon all three of them would be as crazily strong as his parents were. The thought of the stranger in the ANBU mask wouldn't leave Minato alone. He didn't know what it was, but something about the man lingered in his mind. He'd asked Minato to meet him outside of the village, away from curious ears, and away from people like Kushina who might interrupt. A request that could so easily turn out to be a trap. Minato would be a fool to follow it. He couldn't get the thought out of his mind. What if the stranger had information that would help him? Just send a shadow clone. Kushina tried reasoning with him, exasperation carried along in her tone. If you're really going to do this, at least be smart about it. And what if he does attack and dispel my clone? I won't be able to catch up to him before he's able to flee. Kushina let out a sigh. You won't use a shadow clone. You won't let me come along. Should I tie one of your hands behind your back too, to make it even easier for them? I can handle myself, Minato said, refusing to take the bait. And the only reason I'd like you to stay is because if it does turn out to be a trap, I don't want both of us getting caught up in it. You mean when it happens? Kushina shook her head, although her resolve seemed to be crumbling. Just don't start whining when I tell you I told you so. If he was to choose between fighting his way out of a trap or missing something vital in his quest to change the future, it wasn't a difficult decision to make. The stranger hadn't told him when and where exactly they were supposed to meet, and Minato had almost definitely missed him by now. If the meeting was as important to the stranger as it had seemed, he must have left a message or some sort of clue for Minato to find. Instead of a message, Minato was greeted by a chakra signature melting out of the trees and the stranger planting himself directly in front of him. Minato stared. Did you wait here the entire time? He leveled disbelieving eyes at the stranger. What would he have done had Minato decided to come the next day? Or not at all? How had nobody spotted him? They weren't far off from the village, well within the perimeter set by their guards. Kane, the stranger mumbled, holding his arms stiff at his sides. Knew you would. Minato furrowed his brows. Why did you come to the village? He asked on the off chance that the stranger's thoughts were less scattered than they'd been earlier. You told us. Minato's frown deepened. Told who? Who's we? The stranger did not answer. He peered over his shoulder, as though he was waiting for someone. Or else reassuring himself that they were alone. Why are you here? Minato took a step closer. He sharpened his voice, hoping that a harsher tone would get through to him. Tell me. Why did you come? Commanded, the stranger whispered. You have orders to be here, Minato guessed. You didn't before, but you do now. Which meant that somebody had communicated with him since the last time Minato had seen him. Somebody had either sent a message, or had hidden close to Konoha's borders, waiting to pass along the stranger's orders. A sense of foreboding settled heavily in Minato's gut. Those orders, Minato started. What are they? Leaves rustled close to them and Minato tensed, prepared to jump into action as soon as backup charged at him. Kushina had been right. Of course she had. Obviously the stranger wouldn't have come alone. Minato had suspected as much. It was just a cat. A delighted gasp startled Minato out of his interrogation mode. Look! Kitten! Minato stared as the stranger crouched down and held out one hand towards the wild cat. The cat gave him a disinterested look and ignored him. I asked a question, Minato said carefully. Look! She's cute. Very cute, Minato agreed, and I'm sure you'll have time to take a look at her, once we're done. The stranger's shoulders slumped in disappointment. Minato tried to stop staring. The stranger's personality was whimsical and contradictory. Everything currently about him spoke of a child. His gestures, the way he talked, even his chakra, unpolished and rough as though he had not yet learned control over it. Minato knew that as soon as he tried talking to him like a child his behavior would, once again, change. Can you try to focus for me? Minato asked instead. This is important. The stranger sighed, casting a wistful glance at the cat. Can you try to answer me? Minato pressed, watching as the cat lost interest and disappeared in between the trees. Won't like, the stranger mumbled, straightening out of his crouch and stretching his arms in a relaxed manner that didn't fit his nervous tone. The answer? Minato asked. I promise I won't be angry, no matter what it is. He paused, waiting for the stranger to say something. He didn't, so he added, whoever gave you your orders, what did they command you to do? The stranger looked at him calmly, expression hidden by his stolen ANBU mask. Kill. Minato ducked. A dagger sliced the air where his throat had been. Minato hurled one of his kunai and teleported as it reached its mark. The stranger changed direction before he'd even completed the technique, expecting the move. Minato's heart pounded in his chest, and he stayed on the defense as he reevaluated the situation. The stranger knew him well enough to anticipate his fighting moves. His chakra signature had changed, something that shouldn't be possible, had warped from its ragged, unpolished feeling into something sharp and dangerous. Talking was no longer on the table. Minato dodged a kunai, several samban and a swipe of the dagger in rapid succession. He contemplated retreating to the village but decided against it. If this person was as dangerous as their unhinged, unpredictable nature suggested, Minato wouldn't risk luring them towards other people. Fine, Minato muttered, noting the lack of taunts and the single-minded focus of his opponent. Let's do it your way then. He pulled out more of his kunai and threw them in the air, spreading them out among their battlefield. The stranger mirrored his move with regular kunai and threw Minato's off their course. They buried themselves into the ground in a cluster, rather than widely apart as Minato had intended. You're familiar with my fighting style, Minato noted, attempting to lure a reply out of the stranger. He was more than familiar. Many people knew of his signature moves, while only few had ever tried to come up with ways to counter them. Minato was constantly developing new moves. Few of them had yet been seen by anyone other than Kushina and his team. Minato grabbed from more of his kunai and charged.